A single piano note shattered a CEO's world. When Isabel Grant heard the melody rising from her corporate lobby on Christmas Eve, she knew the impossible had happened. The love song written for her 16 years ago by the boy who died in her arms was being played by a janitor she'd never noticed. But Ethan Cole wasn't supposed to exist. He wasn't supposed to know that song. And he definitely wasn't supposed to make her question everything she'd built her empire upon. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The Goldman Tower lobby gleamed like a jewelry box. All marble and gold, crystal chandeliers throwing prisms of light across faces flushed with champagne and self-importance. Christmas Eve had transformed the building's entrance into something between a cathedral and a nightclub, where Chicago's elite gathered for Grant Properties' annual holiday gala. Women in gowns that cost more than most people's cars laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Men in tuxedos checked their phones between handshakes, their attention always divided, always calculating. Isabel Grant stood on the mezzanine level, looking down at the celebration she'd orchestrated but didn't feel part of. At 34, she'd become what business magazines called one of Chicago's most formidable real estate minds, a title that sounded impressive in print but felt hollow at events like this. The black Armani gown she wore had been selected by her stylist. The engagement ring on her finger had been chosen by a committee that included her father, her board members, and finally, reluctantly, her fiancé Nathan Blake. She was supposed to be happy. The merger with Blake Development was 3 weeks away. The wedding was scheduled for Valentine's Day, her father's idea naturally, because sentimentality sold well in press releases. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. So why did she feel like she was suffocating? Darling, stop lurking up here like some gothic heroine. Nathan appeared beside her, his hand finding the small of her back with practiced familiarity. He was handsome in the way male models were handsome, symmetrical, polished, utterly predictable. People are asking for you. The mayor wants a photo, and your father is 3 drinks in and telling the zoning board story again. Isabel manufactured a smile. She'd gotten good at those over the years, expressions that looked genuine in photographs but felt like masks. I'll be down in a moment, I just needed some air. Air? Nathan's laugh had edges. Izzy, we're indoors. What you need is to circulate. This is your party. Act like it. Before she could respond, a commotion near the lobby's far corner drew their attention. A cluster of guests had formed a half circle, their body language radiating that particular brand of upper-class disdain, spines straight, chins lifted, mouths curved in barely concealed contempt. What now? Nathan muttered. If security let another protester in, but Isabel was already moving toward the stairs, something in the scene below tugging at her instincts. She'd learned, in her years climbing to the CEO position, to recognize when a situation was about to spiral, and this one had all the markers. As she descended, the crowd parted slightly, and she saw them. A man in a janitor's uniform, and a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7, her face crumpling under the weight of dozens of staring eyes. The child wore a dress that had seen better days, pale pink with lace that had started to fray at the edges. Her shoes were too big, probably hand-me-downs, and her dark hair had been carefully braided with small silver clips that caught the light. She clutched a worn stuffed rabbit to her chest like a shield. The man beside her had one hand on her shoulder, protective, gentle. He was probably in his mid-30s, though his face carried the kind of weariness that made age difficult to pin down. His janitor's uniform was clean but threadbare at the collar. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his neck. But it was his eyes that caught Isabel's attention, deep brown, the kind that seemed to hold entire stories they'd never tell. I tried to explain, he was saying, his voice low and patient despite the audience. We're not here to crash the party. I just worked late shifts this week, and my daughter's sitter canceled last minute. My supervisor said it would be fine if she waited in the break room, but she wandered off into a private event. The woman speaking was Margaret Chen, one of Grant Properties' senior VPs, and she wielded her authority like a weapon. This is completely inappropriate. There are protocols, security measures. You can't simply bring your children to work because you couldn't find adequate childcare. The little girl pressed closer to her father's leg, and Isabel saw her bottom lip trembling. Mrs. Chen, I apologize. The janitor's jaw was tight, but he kept his voice even. It won't happen again. We'll go to the break room right now. Lily just wanted to see the Christmas tree, the girl whispered, so quietly Isabel almost missed it. It's so pretty. I told Daddy we could just look through the window, but then that lady opened the door and said mean things, and I got scared and ran inside and... Her words dissolved into tears. Oh, for heaven's sake! Margaret's exasperation was theatrical. This is exactly why we have policies about... Margaret! Isabel's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She'd reached the bottom of the stairs, and now the crowd shifted to accommodate her. Their CEO, their center of gravity. What's the problem here? Margaret's expression flickered. Surprise, then calculation. She knew better than most how to spin situations to her advantage. Isabel, I was just addressing a security concern. This man brought his daughter into a private event without authorization. I was explaining that it's inappropriate. Inappropriate, Isabel repeated, looking around at the guests who'd gathered to watch, their champagne glasses held like accessories to their judgment. You're right, Margaret. It is inappropriate. Incredibly inappropriate that a member of our staff working on Christmas Eve while we're up here celebrating would have to bring his daughter because childcare fell through. That's absolutely inappropriate. The subtle shift in her emphasis landed exactly where she intended. Margaret's face colored. But more inappropriate, Isabel continued, crouching down so she was eye level with the little girl, is that we have this spectacular Christmas tree, 20 feet tall, covered in lights and ornaments, and we haven't been properly sharing it. What's your name, sweetheart? The girl hiccuped, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. Lily. Lily, that's a beautiful name. Isabel smiled, and this time it wasn't manufactured. You know what? I've been standing up there all night looking at this party, and I realized something. We have this beautiful tree and this incredible lobby and all these fancy decorations, but we forgot the most important part of Christmas. What part? Lily's voice was small but curious. The part where we share it, where we make people feel welcome instead of making them feel small. Isabel glanced up at the crowd, her gaze sharp. Isn't that right? A murmur of agreement rippled through the guests, not because they believed it, but because Isabel Grant had spoken, and contradicting her would be poor strategy. Mr. Isabel looked up at the janitor, realizing she was waiting for his name. Cole. Ethan Cole, ma'am. His expression was guarded, uncertain how to read this sudden shift. Mr. Cole, I apologize for the confusion. You and Lily are welcome to stay for a few minutes if you'd like. Let her see the tree properly. Maybe some hot chocolate. She directed the last part to one of the catering staff, who nodded quickly. That's really not necessary, Ethan said, his hand tightening slightly on Lily's shoulder. We don't want to intrude. Dad, please? Lily looked up at him with those enormous eyes that no father could resist. Just for a little bit? To see the tree? Ethan's internal war played out across his face, pride versus practicality, his desire to shield his daughter from condescension versus her genuine joy at the simple pleasure of Christmas lights. Finally, he sighed. Just for a few minutes, then we have to go. Lily's face lit up like she'd been handed the moon. Isabel stood, catching Margaret's eye. Thank you for your vigilance, Margaret. I'll take it from here. It was a dismissal, polite but unmistakable. Margaret's smile was brittle as she melted back into the crowd. Nathan appeared at Isabel's elbow, his cologne arriving before his voice. That was generous of you. Good optics. Then, lower. Though we should probably get back to the actual guests, the ones who matter. Something in his tone made Isabel's teeth set, but before she could respond, Lily had tugged free from her father and was standing before the grand piano that sat in the lobby's corner, usually just decorative, occasionally played during special events by hired musicians. Daddy, Lily breathed, her small hand reaching toward the keys but not quite touching. It's so pretty. Ethan moved to her side quickly. Lily, no, we can't touch. Do you play, Lily? Isabel found herself asking. The little girl shook her head. But Daddy does. He plays so beautiful. Sometimes at home when he thinks I'm asleep, I hear him playing on the keyboard, and it sounds like... She struggled for the words. Like stories, like the music is telling stories without words. Is that so? Isabel looked at Ethan with new interest. Ethan's expression shuddered immediately. I used to play. A long time ago, not anymore. But Lily was already tugging at his hand. Please, Daddy, just one song for Christmas? You never play when anyone can hear anymore. Please. Lily, I'd love to hear it, Isabel said, surprising herself. There was something about this man's reluctance that intrigued her, the way he held himself like someone trying to disappear, despite the quiet strength in his bearing. Ethan's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Isabel saw something there, pain, old and deep, mixed with a longing he couldn't quite hide. I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? Nathan had joined them, his CEO voice sliding into place. Come on, Cole. Your daughter wants to hear you play. Don't disappoint her on Christmas Eve. That would be cruel. It was masterfully done, wrapping mockery in apparent encouragement, setting up Ethan to look like the bad guy if he refused. Isabel felt a flash of irritation at her fiancé, but Ethan's hand had already moved to Lily's shoulder. Please, Daddy? Lily's voice was so full of hope it physically hurt to hear. Just twinkle, twinkle, the way you play it? Ethan looked down at his daughter, and whatever walls he'd built crumbled. All right, just one song. A short one. Lily clapped her hands together, and some of the nearby guests chuckled, the way adults do at children's enthusiasm, patronizing but not unkind. Ethan guided Lily to the piano bench, and she scrambled up, her two big shoes dangling above the floor. He sat beside her, his right hand hovering over the keys, and Isabel noticed it for the first time, the way his fingers curled slightly, the faint scarring along the back of his hand, the way he flexed them carefully before placing them on the ivory. The lobby hadn't exactly been quiet before. There was still the murmur of conversation, the clink of glasses, the ambient sound of 100 people pretending to have a good time. But when Ethan's fingers touched the keys, something changed. The first notes were simple, tentative even. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star played in the upper register, clear and sweet like a music box. But then his left hand joined in, and the melody transformed. What had started as a children's song became something else entirely. The bass notes created a landscape, dark and deep, and somehow achingly beautiful. The treble melody danced above it, no longer simple but layered with harmonies that Isabel hadn't known existed within those familiar notes. It was as if Ethan was playing two pieces simultaneously, the innocent surface and the profound depths beneath. The lobby fell silent. Not politely quiet, but truly silent. That rare kind of stillness that descends when something unexpected and undeniable captures every person's attention at once. Isabel stood frozen, her champagne glass forgotten in her hand. Because this wasn't Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. This was impossible. The melody shifted, evolved, and suddenly Isabel wasn't standing in the Goldman Tower lobby anymore. She was 17 again, sitting on a dock at summer music camp, and the boy next to her was playing a song he said he'd written just for her. A song he never got to finish because 3 days later the stage collapsed during the final recital, and he died before the ambulance arrived. 16 years. She hadn't heard this song in 16 years. She tried to recreate it from memory 1,000 times. At piano, on guitar, humming it in the shower, playing it in her dreams, but it had always been incomplete, fragments that didn't quite connect. But this was the song. Complete. Whole. Every note exactly as it had been that last perfect summer before everything fell apart. The room started to spin. Isabel's hand found the back of a nearby chair, gripping it hard enough that her knuckles went white. Ethan continued playing, his eyes closed now, his damaged right hand moving with a grace that seemed to contradict the scars. Beside him, Lily watched her father with an expression of pure adoration, as if she was seeing magic happen in real time. The melody built toward something, a crescendo that felt both inevitable and surprising. And then, just as it reached the moment that had always broken Isabel's heart with its beauty, Ethan's hands lifted from the keys. The final notes hung in the air, then faded into silence. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then the lobby erupted into applause, genuine this time, not the polite golf claps of obligation, but real appreciation. People were wiping at their eyes, murmuring to each other, staring at the janitor in his worn uniform like they'd just witnessed something they couldn't quite explain. But Isabel couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the single impossible thought ricocheting through her mind. How does he know that song? Ethan stood quickly, his expression closing off again as he realized the attention they'd drawn. "Come on, Lily, we should go." "But everyone's clapping!" Lily was beaming, waving at the crowd like a princess acknowledging her subjects. "Now, sweetheart." Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. He scooped her up, settling her on his hip despite the fact that she was probably getting too big for that, and moved toward the exit with the practiced speed of someone used to avoiding notice. "Wait." The word came out of Isabel's mouth before she'd decided to speak. "Mr. Cole, wait." He paused, his back to her, and she saw his shoulders tense. Isabel crossed the space between them, vaguely aware of Nathan following, of the crowd's eyes tracking her movement, of her father somewhere in the periphery watching this unexpected drama unfold. When Ethan turned, his expression was carefully neutral. "Yes, ma'am?" "That song." Isabel's voice came out rougher than she intended. "The one you played. Where did you learn it?" Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition? Fear? But his voice stayed level. "I arranged it myself, based on Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." "No." Isabel shook her head, the room tilting slightly. "No, that's not possible. That specific arrangement, those chord progressions, that melody line in the middle section." "Isabel, what's wrong?" Nathan's hand was on her elbow, his voice concerned but also embarrassed. "It was a nice song, but you're acting like, I need to know where you learned that." Isabel stepped closer to Ethan, ignoring Nathan completely. "Please, it's important." Ethan's jaw tightened. Lily had gone very still in his arms, her child's instinct sensing the tension even if she couldn't understand it. "I told you, I arranged it myself." His eyes held Isabel's, and she saw the lie there. Or not a lie exactly, but a truth so complicated it couldn't be explained in a lobby full of strangers. "Now, if you'll excuse us, it's past my daughter's bedtime." He moved toward the door again, and this time Isabel let him go, her mind reeling. "Well, that was bizarre," Nathan said, steering her back toward the mezzanine stairs. "Though I suppose we should be grateful. He actually had some talent. Better than watching him mop floors, anyway." Isabel barely heard him. She was watching Ethan push through the glass doors, Lily's face pressed against his shoulder as they disappeared into the Chicago night. Someone had pressed a fresh champagne glass into her hand. Someone else was talking to her about the merger, about market projections, about wedding venues. The party continued around her, the moment already being processed and filed away by the guests, as a charming little interlude. The janitor who could play, the CEO who was generous to the working class, a perfect story for their holiday dinner conversations. But Isabel stood in the center of her own gala, surrounded by everything she'd built, and felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Because that song wasn't possible. The boy who wrote it was dead. She'd held his hand as he died, his blood on her white camp t-shirt, his last words nothing but her name whispered like a prayer he knew wouldn't be answered. She'd mourned him. She'd moved on. She'd built an empire on the ashes of that summer, transforming her grief into ambition, her loss into drive. And now a janitor she'd never noticed was playing the song that had defined her, completed in ways she'd never imagined, as casually as if it was just a simple children's melody. "Darling, you're shaking." Nathan's voice pulled her back. "Too much champagne or not enough? Come on, let's get you some water." Isabel let herself be led, her mind still spinning, still trying to make sense of the impossible. Up on the mezzanine, she caught sight of herself in one of the floor-to-ceiling windows, a woman in a black gown, diamond earrings, the city lights behind her creating a halo effect that looked beautiful and fake. She didn't recognize herself. Or maybe, for the first time in 16 years, she did. The party continued for another 2 hours. Isabel moved through it like a ghost, shaking hands and smiling at the right moments, accepting congratulations on the upcoming merger and well wishes for the wedding. Her father gave his annual Christmas Eve speech, drunk enough to be sentimental, but not drunk enough to be embarrassing. Nathan networked with practiced ease, his hand possessive on her waist whenever they stood together. Everything was exactly as it should be. Except Isabel couldn't stop thinking about scarred hands on piano keys, about a little girl's too big shoes, about a song that shouldn't exist. Finally, blessedly, the last guests filtered out into the night, and the catering staff began the efficient work of dismantling a celebration. Isabel made her excuses to Nathan, a headache, exhaustion, too much champagne, and escaped to her office on the 42nd floor. The city spread out below her, a million lights trying to hold back the darkness. Somewhere in that sprawl was Ethan Cole, probably getting his daughter ready for bed, probably hoping this night would be forgotten by morning. But Isabel couldn't forget. She pulled out her phone, fingers hovering over the screen. Then, feeling slightly insane, she opened her company's employee database and typed in a name, Ethan Cole. The file was sparse. Hired 3 years ago, night shift maintenance, no disciplinary actions, no commendations, just a ghost in the system, someone who cleaned office buildings while the world slept. But there was a photograph, standard employee ID, poorly lit, expression neutral. Isabel stared at it for a long time, trying to reconcile this man with the song he'd played, with the impossible things she'd heard. She closed the database and pulled up something else, a video on her phone, stored in a folder she rarely opened. Her finger trembled slightly as she pressed play. The footage was 16 years old, grainy, recorded on someone's camcorder at that last summer recital, the stage before the collapse. And there, in the center, was a boy of 18 with dark hair and eyes that held dreams he thought were within reach. The video had no sound. That part had corrupted long ago. But Isabel remembered the song he'd been playing. The song he'd written for her. The song that had ended mid-phrase when the rigging gave way and the world came crashing down. She paused the video, studying the boy's face. Then she pulled up Ethan Cole's employee photo again. Different angles, different lighting, 16 years of life and loss between them. But the eyes, those eyes were the same. Isabel's champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the hardwood floor in a spray of crystal and liquor that she barely noticed, because it wasn't possible. Christopher Hartley was dead. She'd been there when he died. She'd held him, she'd mourned him, and yet somewhere in this city, a janitor named Ethan Cole was putting his daughter to bed, his scarred hands that had just played a dead boy's song now tucking blankets and reading bedtime stories. Isabel stood in her corner office, surrounded by everything that made her powerful, and realized she knew absolutely nothing. The night stretched out before her, full of questions that shouldn't have answers and impossibilities that had somehow become real. And all she could hear, echoing in the silence of her expensive office, was the sound of piano keys and a song that refused to stay buried. Isabel didn't sleep that night. She sat in her office until dawn, the shattered champagne glass still glittering on the floor like fallen stars, her mind circling the same impossible questions until they wore grooves into her consciousness. At 6:15, as the first gray light began to soften the city's harsh edges, she finally moved. Her fingers were stiff from clutching her phone. Her neck ached from hours of sitting rigid in her chair, but her resolve had crystallized into something hard and bright. She needed answers, and she knew exactly where to start. The Human Resources Department didn't open until 8, but Isabel had access to everything. She pulled Ethan Cole's file again, this time going deeper. Employment history, references, emergency contacts. The picture that emerged was sparse but telling. Before Grant Properties, he'd worked at a warehouse. Before that, a grocery store. Before that, a series of temp jobs that painted a picture of someone just trying to survive. But it was the earlier history that made her breath catch. There was a gap, 5 years where nothing was recorded. And before that gap, a single line that most people would have glossed over. Previous employment? Juilliard School of Music, student worker, 2006 to 2009. Isabel's hands started shaking. Juilliard. Christopher Hartley had been accepted to Juilliard. That had been his dream, his golden ticket out of poverty and into the world he was meant for. They'd talked about it endlessly that summer. Him at Juilliard, her finishing high school, and then joining him in New York, both of them young and stupid enough to believe love and talent were enough to build a life on. She pulled up another screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The Juilliard registrar's office wouldn't open for hours, but their alumni database was public. She searched for Christopher Hartley. Nothing. She searched for Ethan Cole. Nothing. She sat back, frustration mounting. If Ethan Cole and Christopher Hartley were the same person, and that was still impossible because Christopher was dead, then why would he change his name? Why would he be working as a janitor instead of performing at Carnegie Hall? What had happened in those 5 missing years? Her phone buzzed. A text from Nathan. Brunch at 11? My parents want to finalize the ceremony details. Isabel stared at the message, feeling like it was written in a foreign language. The wedding. The merger. Her carefully constructed future. 24 hours ago, these had been the only things that mattered. Now they felt like someone else's life entirely. She texted back a non-committal response and pulled up the building's security footage instead. It took her 40 minutes to find what she was looking for. Ethan Cole clocking in for his shift at midnight the previous night. Lily holding his hand, her backpack nearly as big as she was. They went to the maintenance break room on the 2nd floor, and Ethan settled his daughter with what looked like homework and a juice box before heading out to start his rounds. Isabel watched him move through the building, emptying trash cans and mopping floors with methodical efficiency. There was something almost meditative about the way he worked. No wasted movement, no complaints, just quiet competence in a job most people never noticed. At 3:47 a.m., he returned to the break room to check on Lily. The little girl had fallen asleep on the battered couch, her homework half finished on the table. Ethan draped his jacket over her like a blanket, his hand lingering on her hair with such tenderness that Isabel felt like she was intruding on something sacred. Then he sat at the table and pulled something from his bag, a small electronic keyboard, the kind with mini keys and built-in speakers that probably cost less than $50. He plugged in headphones and began to play, his scarred fingers moving across the miniature keys, and even though Isabel couldn't hear the sound, she could see it in his body. The way his shoulders loosened, the way his eyes closed, the way for just a few stolen minutes he became someone else entirely, someone she might have known 16 years ago. The video timestamp showed he played for 11 minutes before carefully packing the keyboard away and returning to his rounds. Professional. Invisible. A ghost moving through the building's early morning silence. Isabel closed the security footage and made a decision. By 8 a.m., she was showered, dressed in casual clothes that still probably cost more than Ethan's monthly salary, and standing outside Margaret Chen's office with the kind of expression that made smart people nervous. I need Ethan Cole's full employment record, she said without preamble. Everything. Background check, previous employment verification, references, and I need his shift schedule for this week. Margaret looked up from her computer, surprise flickering across her face before professional courtesy smoothed it away. Of course. May I ask why? No. Isabel's smile was sharp. But I need it within the hour. Isabel, it's Christmas morning. I'm aware of the date, Margaret. 1 hour. She left before Margaret could protest further, knowing she was being unreasonable and not particularly caring. The elevator carried her down to the 2nd floor, to the maintenance break room she'd only seen on security footage. It was smaller than she'd expected, more depressing. Fluorescent lights that hummed with electrical tinnitus. Walls painted that particular shade of institutional beige that seemed designed to crush the human spirit. A coffee maker that looked older than Lily. A bulletin board covered in OSHA regulations and shift schedules, and someone's faded photograph of a beach that promised a vacation they'd probably never taken. This was where Ethan spent his nights, where his daughter did her homework, while other children slept in warm beds. Isabel felt something crack inside her chest. Not pity, exactly, but recognition. She'd grown up with money, but she'd also grown up with a father who measured human worth by profit margins. She knew what it was like to be invisible in your own life. Can I help you? Isabel turned to find a maintenance supervisor, badge-reading Rodriguez, standing in the doorway, his expression wary. People wearing Armani sweaters didn't usually visit the break room. I'm looking for Ethan Cole, she said. Is he working today? Rodriguez's wariness deepened. He clocked out at 7. Is there a problem? Because I can tell you right now, Cole's one of my best guys. Whatever complaint you got, it's probably— No complaint, Isabel interrupted. I just need to speak with him. Do you have his home address? I can't give out employee information, ma'am. Company policy. I'm the CEO. I'm aware of who you are, Ms. Grant. Rodriguez's voice was respectful but firm. But that doesn't change privacy regulations. If you need to contact an employee, you can leave a message, and I'll make sure he gets it. Isabel considered pulling rank, demanding the information, reminding this man that she could have him fired with a phone call. But something in Rodriguez's steady gaze stopped her, a loyalty to his people that she found herself respecting. "Tell him I'd like to speak with him," she said instead. "About last night, about the music. Tell him it's important." Rodriguez's expression shifted, still cautious but now curious. "The music?" "He'll know what I mean." She left her number and walked out, feeling Rodriguez's eyes tracking her departure. In the elevator, she checked her phone. Margaret had sent through Ethan's file, efficient as always despite the holiday. Isabel opened it, scanning through pages of information that somehow told her nothing important. No criminal record, decent credit considering his income level, current address in Bridgeport, one of Chicago's working-class neighborhoods. Emergency contact, Maria Santos, neighbor, no mention of Lily's mother, no family listed at all. The background check showed previous addresses, a gap in records between 2009 and 2014, then a series of apartments in increasingly rough neighborhoods. The employment verification confirmed what she'd already found, a string of low-wage jobs, each one held for a year or two before moving on to the next. But there was nothing about Juilliard, nothing about music, nothing that explained how a janitor had learned to play a Dead Boys song. Isabel sat in her car in the Goldman Tower parking garage, staring at the address on the screen. Bridgeport, 20 minutes away. She could be there in 20 minutes. Her phone buzzed again. Nathan. "Isabel, where are you?" "My parents are here." She'd forgotten about brunch, about Nathan's parents and the wedding planning and the merger discussions that would inevitably dominate the conversation even on Christmas morning. She started the car. Bridgeport looked exactly like neighborhoods always did when gentrification hadn't reached them yet, tired but dignified, worn but not broken. The houses were small, close together, many decorated with Christmas lights that looked cheerful in the gray morning. Children's bikes leaned against porches. Cars from the 90s sat in driveways, maintained with care because replacing them wasn't an option. Ethan's building was a 3-story walk-up, brick faded to a color somewhere between red and brown. The front door lock was broken, buzzing open when Isabel pushed it without needing to ring any apartments. She climbed to the 3rd floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was insane. She was the CEO of a major corporation, standing in a stranger's building on Christmas morning, chasing a melody and a ghost. But when she raised her hand to knock on apartment 3C, she couldn't make herself stop. 3 sharp raps. Then silence. Footsteps inside. Light ones, running. "Daddy, someone's here!" The door opened to reveal Lily, now wearing pajamas covered in cartoon snowflakes, her hair loose around her shoulders. Her eyes went wide when she saw Isabel. "You're the pretty lady from the party." Lily's face lit up. "Daddy, it's the nice lady who let us stay." "Lily, I told you not to answer the door without me." Ethan appeared behind his daughter, and the color drained from his face when he saw Isabel. "Ms. Grant!" He was wearing sweatpants and a faded t-shirt from some 5K charity run. His hair was damp like he'd just showered. Without the janitor's uniform, he looked younger, or maybe just more vulnerable. "Mr. Cole, I apologize for coming unannounced." Isabel suddenly felt ridiculous, standing in this hallway in her expensive clothes. "I needed to talk to you about last night." Ethan's jaw tightened. His hand found Lily's shoulder, that same protective gesture Isabel had seen in the lobby. "I don't think that's appropriate." "Please, 5 minutes. It's important." "Can she come in, Daddy?" Lily looked up at her father with hope. "We're making hot chocolate. She can have some too." "Lily, Ms. Grant is very busy." "Actually," Isabel heard herself say, "hot chocolate sounds perfect." Ethan looked like he wanted to refuse, to close the door and pretend this wasn't happening. But Lily was already tugging Isabel inside, chattering about marshmallows and Christmas morning, and he stepped back with the resignation of someone who'd learned to pick his battles. The apartment was small, maybe 800 square feet total, but it was immaculately clean, and somehow Ethan had made it feel like a home. Books lined makeshift shelves built from cinder blocks and wood planks. Lily's drawings covered the refrigerator. A tiny Christmas tree sat in the corner, decorated with paper ornaments and strings of popcorn that Lily had clearly made herself. And against the far wall, taking up space they probably couldn't afford to spare, was an upright piano that had seen better decades. Isabel's breath caught. "Lily, go get dressed," Ethan said quietly. "We're supposed to meet Mrs. Santos for Christmas dinner at noon." "But the hot chocolate, I'll make it. Go on." Lily pouted but obeyed, disappearing into what must have been the bedroom. The apartment's thin walls carried the sound of drawers opening, clothes being pulled out. Ethan moved to the kitchen, just a corner of the main room with a 2-burner stove and a half-sized refrigerator, and began heating milk in a saucepan. His movements were precise, controlled, and Isabel realized he was using the task to avoid looking at her. "How did you find my address?" he asked finally. "Employee records. That's a violation of privacy. I'm the CEO. I have access to everything." "That doesn't make it right." He stirred the milk, his scarred hand steady on the wooden spoon. "What do you want, Ms. Grant?" Isabel moved closer to the piano, running her fingers along its scarred top. It was old enough to be worthless, but maintained with obvious care. The keys clean, the wood polished. Sheet music sat on the stand, annotated in pencil. Chopin. Something complicated. "The song you played last night," she said. "Where did you really learn it?" "I told you. I arranged it myself." "You're lying." The word hung between them, sharp and undeniable. Ethan's shoulders stiffened, but he kept stirring the milk, his back to her. "With respect, Miss Grant, I don't owe you any explanations about my personal life. I played piano at a company event because my daughter asked me to. That's all. That song was written 16 years ago by someone I knew. Someone who died before he could finish it. And last night, you played it exactly as it was meant to be completed. So either you're lying about where you learned it, or—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. "Or what?" Ethan turned finally, and his eyes were hard. "Or I'm a ghost. Or I somehow stole a dead man's music? What exactly are you accusing me of?" "I'm not accusing you of anything. I just need to understand." "You want to understand?" Ethan's voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath. "Fine. That song was incomplete. I heard it once, years ago, at a music camp. I thought it was beautiful, so I finished it. I gave it away. I never took credit for it because it wasn't entirely mine to begin with. Does that satisfy your curiosity?" "Music camp." Isabel felt the room tilt. "What music camp? Does it matter?" "Yes." The word came out fierce, desperate. "Yes, it matters. Because the boy who wrote that song was named Christopher Hartley, and he was at Interlochen Arts Camp in the summer of 2009, and he died when the stage collapsed during the final recital. And you—" She stopped, seeing something shift in Ethan's expression. "You were there. You were at that camp." Ethan turned back to the stove, but not before Isabel saw his hand tremble. "A lot of people were at that camp. But you knew Christopher. You knew him well enough to finish his song." "I knew who he was." Ethan poured the hot milk into 2 mugs, added cocoa powder with mechanical precision. "Everyone knew who he was. He was the scholarship kid who played like an angel. We all knew his name." "What was yours?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Ethan's hand froze halfway to adding marshmallows. "What was your name?" Isabel pressed. "At camp, before you became Ethan Cole." "I've always been Ethan Cole." "Bullshit." The curse seemed to surprise them both. Isabel never swore. It was unbecoming, her father had taught her, a sign of poor vocabulary and poorer breeding, but she was past caring about becoming right now. "Daddy said a bad word," Lily's voice drifted from the bedroom, delighted. "Finish getting dressed," Ethan called back, his eyes never leaving Isabel's. Then, quieter. "You need to leave." "Not until you tell me the truth." "The truth?" A bitter smile touched his mouth. "You want the truth, Miss Grant?" "Fine. The truth is that 16 years ago I was a poor kid at a summer camp full of rich kids. I played piano well enough to get a scholarship, but not well enough to matter. I watched Christopher Hartley perform and thought he was the most talented musician I'd ever heard. When he died, it broke something in all of us. And yes, I heard that song he'd written for... He stopped abruptly. For who? Isabel's voice was barely a whisper. For some girl. Ethan's expression was shuttered again. He talked about her constantly, how she was going to change the world, how she was brilliant and beautiful and way out of his league, but somehow didn't know it. It was nauseating, actually. Young love always is. Isabel felt tears burning behind her eyes. What happened to you after the accident? I went home. Tried to forget about music. Obviously didn't succeed. He gestured around the apartment, at the piano that dominated the space, at the life he'd built around something he claimed to have left behind. Now, are we done here? Your hand. Isabel pointed to the scars. What happened to your hand? Workplace accident 3 years ago. Before that, your records show a 5-year gap, 2009 to 2014. What were you doing? Ethan's face went completely blank, and Isabel knew she'd hit something raw. That's none of your business. Were you in New York? Were you at Juilliard? Ms. Grant, because Christopher Hartley was supposed to go to Juilliard. And if you're not him, if you're just some other scholarship kid who happened to know his song, then why do you have his eyes? The words tumbled out before she could stop them, and Isabel saw them land like blows. Ethan actually took a step back, his face draining of color. Daddy? Lily emerged from the bedroom, now wearing jeans and a sweater with a reindeer on it. Why do you look sad? I'm not sad, sweetheart. Ethan's voice was gentle, but his hands were shaking as he handed Isabel her mug of hot chocolate. Ms. Grant was just leaving. But she didn't drink her cocoa yet. Isabel looked at the little girl, then at her father, then at the apartment around them. This small, carefully maintained space that somehow held more warmth than her penthouse ever had. And she made a decision that would change everything. Lily, she said, crouching down to the child's level, your daddy is right. I do need to go, but first, can I ask you something? Lily nodded, her expression serious. Has your daddy ever told you about when he was young, about music school or summer camp or... Ms. Grant, Ethan's voice was sharp with warning, but Lily was already shaking her head. Daddy doesn't talk about before. Before me and Mommy died and it was just us two, he says some things hurt too much to talk about, so we just love each other now instead. The casual way she said it, Mommy died, broke something in Isabel's chest. She looked up at Ethan, saw the pain he carried etched into every line of his body. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have come here. She stood, setting down the untouched hot chocolate, and moved toward the door. But as she passed the piano, her hand touched the keys almost involuntarily, pressing down on middle C. The note rang out pure and clear, and she felt Ethan go still behind her. He loved you, you know, she said, not turning around. Christopher. He told me the song was for the most important person in his world, someone who believed in him when no one else did, someone who made him want to be better than he was. Her voice cracked. I was 17. I thought we had forever. And then the world ended in about 30 seconds, and I've spent 16 years trying to understand why I survived, and he didn't. Silence filled the apartment, broken only by Lily humming quietly to herself as she arranged marshmallows in her cocoa. Then Ethan spoke, his voice so low Isabel almost missed it. The stage collapse wasn't an accident. Isabel turned, her heart hammering. What? The rigging. It was inspected 2 weeks before the recital. Everything was perfect. And then suddenly the main support gave way, and half the ceiling came down, and they blamed it on weather or age or structural defects that mysteriously appeared overnight. Ethan's eyes met hers, and they were full of something dark and old and angry. But I was there during setup. I saw the rigging, and I saw the inspectors afterward, the ones with Grant Properties logos on their clipboards. The room started spinning. No, that's not... My father's company built the amphitheater, but we didn't... Your father's company cut corners, used substandard materials, paid off inspectors, and when people died, they paid off families and threatened lawsuits and made the whole thing disappear. Ethan's voice was still quiet, but now it cut like broken glass. Christopher Hartley died because your family values profit over human life. And you want to know why I won't tell you my story? Because my story involves lawyers and NDAs and a settlement that made sure I'd never play professionally again. Isabel couldn't breathe. You're lying. My father wouldn't. Your father, Ethan interrupted, offered me $200,000 to sign a statement saying the accident was unavoidable, to never speak about the faulty equipment or the falsified inspection records, to disappear. He laughed, sharp and bitter. I was 19. I had a crushed hand, a dead future, and medical bills I couldn't pay. So I took the money. I signed the papers. And I became someone else. Daddy, you're scaring me. Lily had gone very quiet, her cocoa forgotten. Ethan immediately softened, crossing to his daughter and pulling her into a hug. I'm sorry, baby. I'm just talking to Ms. Grant about grown-up stuff. Nothing for you to worry about. But Isabel was already backing toward the door, her mind reeling. The stage collapse. The investigation that had gone nowhere. Her father's insistence that they'd done everything right, that the company bore no responsibility, that the families were just looking for someone to blame. She'd been 17, she'd been drowning in grief. She'd believed him. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear to God, I didn't know. Well, now you do. Ethan's eyes were hard. So take your curiosity and your guilt and your expensive clothes and get out of my home. Some of us have Christmas dinners to get to. Isabel reached the door, her hand on the knob, but she couldn't make herself turn it. The song. You said you finished it. You said you gave it away. Who did you give it to? For a long moment, Ethan didn't answer. Then, does it matter? Yes. Why? Because, Isabel's voice broke. Because I need to know if I'm the only one who's been mourning him. I need to know if he mattered to anyone else. If the song mattered. Something in Ethan's expression shifted, gentled almost imperceptibly. He mattered. And the song was beautiful. I made sure it ended the way he would have wanted, with hope instead of despair. That's all you need to know. It wasn't enough, not even close, but Isabel could see Lily watching them with worried eyes, and she knew she'd already done enough damage for one morning. Thank you for the hot chocolate, she said inadequately. Merry Christmas. She left before either of them could respond, her heels clicking against the stairs in a rhythm that sounded like running away. Outside, the day had turned brighter, sunlight breaking through the clouds to illuminate the working-class neighborhood in shades of gold. Children were playing in the street with new toys, their laughter carrying on the cold air. Somewhere a radio played Christmas carols. Isabel sat in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel, and finally let herself cry. For Christopher Hartley, who died before his promise could be fulfilled. For Ethan Cole, who'd been forced to bury his dreams and his name. For Lily, growing up in poverty, while Isabel lived in luxury built on the same tragedy that destroyed her father. And for herself, for the 17-year-old girl who'd believed in love and music and justice before the world taught her that money could buy silence and power could erase inconvenient truths. Her phone rang. Nathan, probably wondering where she was, why she'd missed brunch, whether she understood that his parents were very important people who didn't appreciate being stood up. She let it ring. Instead, she pulled up her father's number. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Then she opened her browser and typed in, Grant Properties Interlochen Amphitheater Collapse 2009. The first page of results was all bland corporate statements and obituaries. But if you knew where to look, if you scrolled past the sanitized version to the conspiracy theory forums and the angry blog posts from families who'd lost children, you found a different story. Stories about faulty rigging, ignored safety violations, inspection records that didn't match the physical evidence, a company that had prioritized budget over building codes, and then buried the consequences under mountains of legal paperwork and strategic philanthropy. Isabel read until her eyes burned, until the sun had moved past noon, until her phone had buzzed itself to death with ignored messages. Then she started the car and drove back toward downtown, toward the gleaming tower that bore her family's name, toward the empire built on compromises she was only beginning to understand. But this time, she wasn't running away. This time, she was preparing for war. The Grant Properties archives occupied the entire basement level of the Goldman Tower, a climate-controlled labyrinth of filing cabinets and document boxes that smelled of old paper and corporate secrets. Isabel had been down here exactly twice in her 8 years as CEO, once during her orientation, and once when the auditors had needed historical records for a merger review. Now, at 2 in the morning, 3 days after Christmas, she was back with a bottle of wine she wasn't drinking and a determination that felt like desperation. The security guard had looked at her strangely when she'd signed in, but he knew better than to question why the CEO was working through the night. People in her position were expected to be obsessive, to sacrifice sleep and sanity for the company. What he didn't know was that she wasn't here for the company at all. She was here to destroy it, or at least to understand what it had destroyed in her name. The files from 2009 took up an entire section. 3 years of projects, contracts, legal documents organized with the kind of meticulous efficiency that characterized her father's reign. Robert Grant believed in documentation, in paper trails that could be followed or buried as needed. Everything recorded, everything controlled. Isabel pulled the box labeled Interlaken Summer Arts Festival, Amphitheater Construction 2008-2009, and carried it to one of the archive tables. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, dust motes dancing in the fluorescent light. The first documents were standard: building permits, architectural plans, contractor agreements. Everything looked legitimate, professional, exactly what you'd expect from a major construction project. But Isabel had learned in business school that the truth was rarely in the primary documents. It was in the margins, the amendments, the internal memos that weren't meant for outside eyes. She dug deeper. Halfway through the box, she found the inspection reports. The official ones showed the amphitheater's rigging system had passed all safety checks with flying colors, but paper-clipped to the back of the June 2009 report was a handwritten note on Grant Properties letterhead. Jerry, we need this approved by Friday, or we lose the bonus clause. The modifications are cosmetic, won't affect load capacity. Make it happen. R.G. Isabel's father's initials. His handwriting. Her stomach turned. She kept reading. Found another memo dated 2 weeks before the collapse. Engineering flagged concerns about the main support beam. Recommend reinforcement before the recital. Estimated cost $47K, timeline 10 days. The response, again in her father's hand, cost not approved. Event proceeds as scheduled. We're already over budget on this project. Isabel pushed away from the table, her chair scraping against concrete. She walked to the far wall, pressed her forehead against the cool cinder block, and tried to breathe through the nausea. $47,000. The cost of reinforcing a support beam. The cost of preventing a tragedy that killed 3 people and injured 17 others. The cost her father had deemed too high. She'd driven a car that cost more than that when she was 17. The archive room's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, indifferent to her crisis. Somewhere in the building above, the night cleaning crew was working, people like Ethan, invisible in their labor, supporting structures they'd never own. Isabel returned to the box and found what she'd been dreading, the settlement files. There were 8 of them total, 8 families who'd been paid to stay quiet. The amounts varied, larger payouts for the 3 fatalities, smaller ones for the injured. Each file contained the same basic structure: hospital records, legal correspondence, and finally, a settlement agreement with an attached non-disclosure clause. She found Ethan's file near the bottom. Except his name wasn't Ethan, it was Christopher Ethan Hart. The hospital records made her vision blur. Crushed right hand, multiple fractures, nerve damage. Emergency surgery followed by 3 more corrective procedures. Prognosis: permanent loss of fine motor control, approximately 60% function retained. Not enough for professional performance. Not enough for the dreams he'd built his life around. The psychological evaluation was worse. Severe depression, trauma response, survivor's guilt. The evaluating psychiatrist had recommended intensive therapy and monitoring for suicidal ideation. He'd been 19 years old. The settlement offer was dated 4 months after the accident, $200,000 in exchange for his signature on a document that absolved Grant Properties of all responsibility and forbade him from ever discussing the circumstances of the collapse or the company's role in it. The alternative, spelled out in a letter from Grant Properties' legal team, was years of litigation that would bankrupt him, destroy any chance at a future career, and ultimately result in nothing because the company had resources he couldn't match. It wasn't an offer. It was extortion dressed in legal language. Christopher Hart had signed. And then, according to the public records Isabel had pulled earlier, he'd ceased to exist. No tax returns, no employment records, no trace of him anywhere until Ethan Cole appeared in 2014, working at a warehouse in Gary, Indiana. 5 years of nothing. 5 years of a young man disappearing himself because existing hurt too much. Isabel sat with the files spread around her like evidence at a crime scene and felt the weight of every choice that had led her here. Every time she'd believed her father's version of events. Every time she'd accepted the official story because questioning it would have been uncomfortable. Every time she'd chosen the path of least resistance while other people paid the price. Her phone buzzed, a text from Nathan. "Where have you been? You missed dinner with the Blakes again. My mother thinks you're having an affair. Call me." An affair. As if that was the only possible explanation for her absence, the only crisis that could matter. Isabel looked at the text, at Nathan's self-centered concern, and something crystallized in her mind. She'd been engaged to him for 8 months and couldn't remember a single conversation about anything that mattered. Not real conversations. Not the kind where you revealed the broken parts of yourself and trusted the other person to handle them with care. They'd talked about the merger, the wedding, real estate markets and quarterly projections, and which caterer offered the best prix-fixe menu. They'd had sex that was competent and scheduled, usually on Wednesday nights because that's when both their calendars aligned. But she couldn't remember the last time he'd asked her what she was afraid of, or what she dreamed about, or whether she was happy. She opened her phone's notes app and started making a list. Not a business plan, not a strategy document, just a raw accounting of everything she needed to do. Tell Nathan the truth. End the engagement. Confront father about the cover-up. Find Ethan. Apologize properly. Figure out what to do about the company. The last item made her pause. What could she do? The statute of limitations on the construction negligence had long since passed. The settlement agreements were legally binding. She couldn't undo what her father had done, couldn't bring back the people who died, or restore the futures that were stolen. But she could stop pretending she didn't know. She photographed every document in the box, uploading them to a secure cloud storage that only she could access. Then she carefully returned everything to its place, closed the box, and carried it back to the shelf. The security guard was reading a paperback when she signed out, the clock above his desk showing 3:47 a.m. He looked up, did a double take at her expression. "You okay, Miss Grant?" Isabel realized she'd been crying without noticing, tears tracking mascara down her cheeks. She probably looked like a horror movie extra. "I'm fine," she said automatically. Then, more honestly, "No, actually, I'm not fine. But I will be." He nodded, understanding in his eyes that she hadn't earned but appreciated anyway. "Get some rest, ma'am. Whatever it is, it'll still be there tomorrow." But that was exactly what Isabel was afraid of, that it would still be there tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. That injustice compounded itself, becoming infrastructure, becoming normal, until everyone forgot it had ever been a choice. She drove home as the city began its pre-dawn stirring, delivery trucks making their rounds, early shift workers trudging to the L stations. Chicago in winter was brutally honest. No softness, no pretense, just concrete and wind and people surviving. Her penthouse felt like a museum when she entered, all carefully curated beauty and no life. The Christmas tree her decorator had installed stood in the corner, its designer ornaments perfectly spaced, its lights on a timer that created ambiance for no one. Isabel walked past it to the window and looked out at the city spreading below her. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably getting Lily ready for school, making breakfast in that tiny kitchen, preparing for another shift of work that destroyed his body while barely paying his bills. And she was up here, 30 floors above the streets, insulated by money that had been made through negligence and lies. Her phone rang. Not Nathan this time. Her father. She let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message. "Isabel, I need to see you in my office at 9. We have a situation with the Blake merger. Some concerns have been raised about their accounting practices. We need to discuss our exposure before this becomes a problem." Isabel played the message twice, parsing the careful language. Concerns about accounting practices. Their exposure. Not the truth. Not the ethics of the situation, just liability management. She was so tired of liability management. At 8:30, she texted Nathan. "We need to talk. Can you come to my office at 11? His response was immediate. About time. I'll be there. Then she called her assistant. Clear my calendar for the next 2 days. No exceptions, no meetings, nothing. But Ms. Grant, you have the quarterly board review tomorrow, and the merger signing is cancel it all. Are you sure? Completely. And Sarah, I need you to pull everything we have on Blake Development's financial records. Every audit, every bank statement, every contract. I want it on my desk by noon. There was a pause. Should I notify your father? No, just you and me on this one. Another pause, longer this time. Sarah had worked for Isabel for 4 years and had learned to read between the lines. Understood. I'll have it ready. Isabel showered, dressed in her armor, the black suit that made her look invincible, the heels that added 3 inches to her height, the minimal jewelry that suggested power without trying. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw her father's daughter, trained in his image, shaped by his values. Then she thought about Christopher Hart's crushed hand and Lily's 2 big shoes and Ethan's careful way of making his daughter feel safe in a world that had tried to destroy them both. She took off the suit and put on something softer, a cashmere sweater, tailored pants, boots instead of heels. Small changes, but they felt like rebellion. Her father's office was on the 45th floor, corner position with views that made visitors feel small. Robert Grant had designed it that way deliberately, every element calculated to establish dominance. The massive desk, the uncomfortable guest chairs, the wall of awards and accolades that reminded everyone who they were dealing with. He looked up when she entered, his expression moving from annoyance to concern. You look terrible. Are you sick? I'm fine. Isabel closed the door behind her, noticed her hand was shaking. You wanted to discuss the Blake merger? Yes. Our due diligence team found some irregularities in their accounts receivable, inflated projections, possibly fabricated contracts. If even half of what they suspect is true, Blake Development's valuation is overstated by at least 40%. Her father leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. We need to decide whether to proceed or pull out. The wedding complicates things. The wedding? Isabel heard herself laugh, sharp and bitter. That's what you're worried about? The optics of calling off a wedding? Don't be naive, Isabel. This merger represents a 20% expansion of our portfolio. But if Blake's numbers are fraudulent, we're buying liability, not assets. The personal relationship is secondary to the business decision. The personal relationship. She repeated his words, tasting their emptiness. Is that what you call it when you arrange a marriage to facilitate a business deal? Her father's eyes narrowed. What's this about? If you're having cold feet about Nathan, I'm not talking about Nathan. Isabel pulled the envelope from her bag, copies of the documents she'd found, printed in the pre-dawn hours. She dropped it on his desk. I'm talking about Interlaken, summer 2009, the amphitheater collapse. The change in her father's expression was subtle but unmistakable. Wariness replacing irritation, calculation replacing concern. That was 16 years ago, he said carefully. Why are you bringing up ancient history? Because I met someone who was there, someone whose life your cost-cutting destroyed. Isabel, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but that situation was thoroughly investigated. The company was cleared of any wrongdoing. The company paid 8 families to sign NDAs and disappear. That's not the same as being cleared. Her voice was steady now, fueled by anger that had been building for days. I read the internal memos. I saw the engineering reports you ignored. I know you were warned about the support beam and chose not to fix it because $47,000 was too expensive. Her father stood, his full height and authority deployed like weapons. You need to be very careful about what you're accusing me of. I'm not accusing you, I'm stating facts, facts that are documented in our own archives. Isabel held his gaze, refusing to be cowed. 3 people died, Dad. 17 more were injured, and one of them was a 19-year-old pianist who lost his career because you decided a bonus clause was more important than human safety. That boy was compensated generously. His name was Christopher Hart. Isabel's voice cracked. And he wasn't that boy. He was Christopher Hartley's best friend, and he loved music more than anything, and your negligence destroyed him. The words hung in the air between them, and Isabel saw the exact moment her father made the connection. His face went pale. Christopher Hartley, he said slowly. The scholarship student you dated that summer. The one who died in the collapse. Yes. And this other boy, this Hart, you've been in contact with him? He works in our building. He's a janitor. He has a 7-year-old daughter and a hand that barely functions, and he lives in a 3-floor walk-up in Bridgeport because that's all he can afford with the money you paid him to stay quiet. Her father moved to the window, his back to her, and Isabel could see him processing, calculating his next move. When he turned back, his expression had shifted to something gentler, or at least to his version of gentle. Isabel, I understand you're upset. First love, tragic death, it's traumatic, but you're conflating separate issues. Yes, there were complications with that project. Construction is dangerous, accidents happen. We did everything legally required. Legally required isn't the same as morally right. In business, it's all that matters. Her father's voice hardened. You want to know the truth? Fine. Yes, I made choices that prioritized budget over redundant safety measures. And yes, those choices had consequences. But if I'd delayed that project for additional reinforcement, we'd have missed our deadline, paid penalties that would have bankrupted 3 subcontractors, and potentially lost the company. I made the call that saved 200 jobs at the risk of an accident that statistically was unlikely to occur. But it did occur. Yes. And it was tragic, and we compensated the families, and we improved our safety protocols but I will not apologize for making hard choices in impossible situations. That's what leadership is. Isabel stared at her father, this man who'd taught her everything about business and nothing about humanity, and felt something break inside her that had been cracking for years. No, she said quietly. Leadership is admitting when you're wrong. It's prioritizing people over profit. It's building something that doesn't require anyone else's destruction. That's naive fairy tale thinking. The world doesn't work that way. Then maybe we should change the world. Her father laughed, genuinely amused. With what? Good intentions? Isabel, you're the CEO of a major corporation. You don't have the luxury of naive idealism. Every decision you make affects hundreds of employees, thousands of investors. You want to dismantle the company over a 16-year-old accident? Fine. But you'll destroy everyone who depends on us in the process. He was right, Isabel realized. That was the trap. The system perpetuated itself because dismantling it hurt the people at the bottom first. The executives would land on their feet, would find new positions, new opportunities. But the secretaries and maintenance staff and entry-level workers would be the ones who suffered. People like Ethan. I'm not trying to destroy the company, she said finally. I'm trying to save it, to transform it into something that doesn't require burying bodies to succeed. Bodies. Her father's voice was ice. Be careful with your metaphors, Isabel. You're talking about a construction accident, not murder. What's the difference when you knew it could happen and chose not to prevent it? The silence that followed was absolute. Outside the office, the city continued its business, deals being made, lives being lived, the machinery of commerce grinding forward. Inside, a daughter and father faced each other across a divide that had always existed but was only now becoming visible. I want the Blake merger postponed, Isabel said. I want a full audit of their finances, and I want you to tell me the truth about how many other projects we've cut corners on, how many other families we've paid off, how many other Christopher Harts are out there living under different names because we destroyed their futures. Isabel, I'm not asking. I'm the CEO. This is my company now, whether you like it or not, and I'm done pretending I don't see what we've built it on. Her father studied her for a long moment, and she saw him recalculating, adjusting his strategy to account for this new variable his daughter had become. Fine, he said. We'll postpone the merger. Review the Blake financials. But Isabel, you need to understand something. Once you start pulling on these threads, the whole tapestry unravels. Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared to face the board, the investors, the media, when they start asking questions you can't answer? I don't know, Isabel admitted, but I'm tired of being complicit in my own ignorance, so I guess we're going to find out. She left before he could respond, her legs shaking but carrying her forward. The elevator ride down to her own office felt like descending through layers of her old life, each floor taking her further from the person she'd been and closer to someone she didn't quite recognize yet. Sarah was waiting with the Blake development files, her expression carefully neutral. Everything you requested. I flagged the concerning sections. Thank you. Isabel took the stack of folders, then paused. Sarah, how long have you worked here? 4 years with you, 7 total with the company. In that time, have you ever seen anything that made you uncomfortable? Decisions that felt wrong, even if they were legal? Sarah's professional mask cracked slightly. Ms. Grant, I'm not sure. I'm not asking you to betray confidences. I'm just asking for honesty. The silence stretched for a moment before Sarah spoke, her voice careful. There have been times when I've wondered if we were doing the right thing, but I assumed you knew what you were doing, that it was part of some larger strategy I wasn't privy to. What if I told you I'm not sure anymore? That I'm starting to think we've been doing the wrong thing for the right reasons, or maybe the wrong reasons dressed up as the right ones? Sarah's expression shifted, surprise mixed with something that might have been relief. Then I'd say it's about time someone started asking those questions. At 11, Nathan arrived in Isabel's office with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. He kissed her cheek, poured himself coffee from her personal pot, and settled into the chair across from her desk like he owned the space. So, he said, what did you want to discuss? If it's about the wedding, my mother already called the caterer about adjusting the menu. Apparently squid ink pasta is trendy now. Nathan, we need to talk about your company's finances. The charm slid off his face. What about them? Our due diligence team found irregularities, inflated projections, contracts that don't appear to exist. Care to explain? That's absurd. We're a transparent operation. You're cooking the books. Isabel pushed the files across her desk. And you've been doing it for at least 2 years, probably longer. You've been using the merger with Grant Properties as a way to legitimize fraudulent valuations. Nathan's face went through several expressions before settling on defensive anger. Those are complicated financial instruments that your accountants clearly don't understand. Nathan, I minored in accounting. I understand perfectly. You've been running a shell game and you thought marrying me would protect you when it collapsed. He stood abruptly, his hand slamming down on her desk. You want to call off the merger? Fine. But think carefully about what that means, Isabel. My family has connections you can't afford to lose. The Blake name opens doors that I no longer want to walk through. Isabel stood as well, meeting his aggression with calm certainty. The merger is off. The wedding is off. Whatever this was, she gestured between them. It's over. You're making a huge mistake. No, Nathan, I'm correcting one. His face twisted into something ugly, and for a moment Isabel saw what she'd been too naive or too complicit to notice before, the entitled rage of someone who'd never been denied, who viewed other people as instruments for his advancement. You know what your problem is? Nathan's voice was low and vicious. You think you're better than everyone else. You think your family's money makes you noble. But you're just as corrupt as the rest of us. You're just better at hiding it. Maybe, Isabel agreed, but at least I'm trying to change. Change? He laughed. You can't change. This is who you are, who your family made you. You're a Grant. You'll never be anything else. He left, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the artwork on her walls. Isabel sank back into her chair, her hands trembling from adrenaline and fear, and something that felt almost like freedom. Sarah appeared in the doorway moments later. I called security. They'll escort him from the building. Thank you. Isabel looked at her assistant, this woman who'd been silently witnessing her unraveling. Sarah, I need you to set up a meeting. Off-site, completely confidential. With whom? Ethan Cole, the maintenance worker from Christmas Eve. Tell him I'd like to speak with him about the past, about Christopher Hart, about making things right, if that's even possible. Sarah's eyebrows rose, the most emotion Isabel had ever seen her display, but she simply nodded. I'll arrange it. Alone in her office, Isabel pulled up the security footage from Christmas Eve one more time, watched Ethan play the piano, watched Lily's face light up, watched her own expression as she heard the impossible song. She'd spent 16 years building walls around her grief, transforming it into ambition that looked like strength, but was really just another form of running away. She'd become her father's perfect successor, sharp and strategic and willing to sacrifice anything for the company. But Ethan had spent those same 16 years surviving, choosing his daughter over his dreams, dignity over bitterness, life over the easiest ways to escape it. He'd taken what her family destroyed and made something beautiful anyway. Isabel's phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. Mr. Cole agreed to meet. Tomorrow, 7 p.m., Millennium Park. He said to tell you, I'll be at the piano pavilion. Bring an umbrella. Forecast says rain. She read the message 3 times, parsing it for hidden meaning. The piano pavilion, where the city hosted free concerts in summer, where music was meant to belong to everyone, where perhaps they could finally tell each other the truth. The afternoon passed in a blur of phone calls and rescheduled meetings. The board members were angry about the merger postponement. The investors wanted explanations. Her father called twice, then stopped, which was somehow more ominous than his anger. And through it all, Isabel kept thinking about Ethan's question. Does it matter? Did it matter where he'd learned the song? Did it matter that Christopher Hartley was dead but somehow still alive? Did any of it matter if she couldn't figure out how to make it mean something? By evening, she was exhausted enough that the world felt slightly unreal. She drove home through streets slick with the rain that had started falling, the city lights reflecting in puddles like fallen stars. In her penthouse, she poured a glass of wine she didn't drink and stood at the window watching the storm. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the skyline in brief flashes that made the buildings look like they were appearing and disappearing, solid one moment and ghost the next. Her phone rang. An unknown number. Ms. Grant? The voice was male, young, nervous. This is Daniel Rodriguez. From maintenance, Mr. Cole's supervisor. Isabel's heart started hammering. Is Ethan okay? Is Lily... They're fine, but I thought you should know. Mr. Cole submitted his resignation today, said he's taking a job in Milwaukee, moving at the end of the month. I tried to talk him out of it. He's a good worker, reliable. But he seemed pretty set on leaving. The world tilted. Did he say why? Just that it was time for a change. But Ms. Grant? Between you and me? I think he's running from something, and I think that something might be you. After Rodriguez hung up, Isabel stood in the silence of her too-large apartment and understood with perfect clarity what was happening. Ethan was disappearing again, creating distance before she could ask more questions, demand more truths, force him to relive traumas he'd spent 16 years trying to forget. She'd destroyed his life once through her family's negligence. Now she was doing it again through her need for answers. The responsible thing, the kind thing, would be to let him go, to leave him and Lily to their new start in Milwaukee, to stop pulling at wounds that wanted to heal. But Isabel had spent 16 years being responsible, being kind in ways that actually meant being cowardly. And she was so tired of choosing the easy path. Tomorrow at the piano pavilion, she would tell Ethan Cole the truth, about what she'd found in the archives, about ending her engagement, about wanting to make amends, even though she knew it was probably impossible. And then she would let him decide whether forgiveness was something he could offer or whether some debts were too deep to ever be repaid. The rain continued falling, washing the city clean of its daily grime while leaving everything else, all the important stains, all the structural damage, exactly where it had always been. The rain had stopped by the time Isabel reached Millennium Park, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming under streetlights that turned puddles into mirrors. She'd brought the umbrella anyway, clutching it like a talisman as she walked toward the Pritzker Pavilion, her boots clicking against wet pavement in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. 7 o'clock. She was 15 minutes early, unable to stay in her office a moment longer, unable to pretend she was doing anything productive when all she could think about was what she would say to Ethan when he arrived. If he arrived. There was always the possibility he'd changed his mind, decided Milwaukee was more appealing than confronting a past that kept refusing to stay buried. The pavilion was deserted, its sweeping steel architecture forming a crown above rows of empty seats. In summer, this place held thousands. Families sprawled on blankets, children dancing to orchestras, the whole democratic beauty of free music under open sky. Now it was just Isabel and the ghosts of melodies past, the stage dark and waiting. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. Ethan emerged from the shadows wearing jeans and a worn jacket, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He'd left Lily somewhere safe, Isabel realized. This conversation wasn't meant for a child's ears. The thought made her heart ache with gratitude she hadn't earned. "You came," she said, her voice smaller than she'd intended. "I almost didn't." He stopped a few feet away, maintaining careful distance. "Rodriguez said it was important, that you needed to talk to me about Christopher Hart." The name hung between them, not Ethan's current identity, but the ghost he'd tried to leave behind. Isabel saw him flinch slightly at the sound of it, as if hearing his old name spoken aloud caused physical pain. "I went through the company archives," she said. "I found the files from Interlaken, the inspection reports, the internal memos, the settlements." She paused, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I know what happened. I know what my father did. And I know what he paid you to keep quiet about." Ethan's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, a subtle relaxation, as if he'd been holding his breath for 16 years and could finally exhale. "So now you know," he said. "Does that make you feel better? Does it absolve you somehow?" "No. It makes me feel complicit." Isabel's hands tightened on the umbrella. "I was 17, and I was grieving, and I believed my father when he said the company did everything right. I never questioned it. I never looked deeper. I just moved on." People do that. Move on. It's called survival. "But you didn't get to move on, did you? You had to disappear, change your name, give up music, live with constant pain in your hand." Her voice cracked. "You had to become someone else because my family made it impossible for Christopher Hart to exist." A muscle tightened in Ethan's jaw. "I chose the settlement. No one forced me to sign. They threatened you with bankruptcy and legal battles you couldn't win. That's not a choice, that's coercion." "Maybe." Ethan finally moved, walking past her toward the stage, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. "But I took the money, I signed the papers, and yeah, I disappeared, but that was on me. I could have fought, could have gone to the media, made noise, refused to go quietly. Instead, I took the cash and ran. You were 19 and traumatized. I was a coward." He turned to face her, and his eyes were full of something raw and honest. "You want the truth, Ms. Grant? Fine. The truth is that part of me was relieved. Relieved that I had an excuse to quit, to stop trying, to give up on dreams that terrified me as much as they drove me. Christopher Hartley died in that collapse, and I used your father's money to make sure Christopher Hart died too, because being dead was easier than failing." The confession landed between them like a stone dropped in still water, ripples spreading outward into everything Isabel thought she understood. "You didn't fail," she said quietly. "You survived." Same thing sometimes. Ethan's laugh was bitter. "You know what the worst part is? I was jealous of him, of Christopher Hartley. Your Christopher. The golden boy who everyone loved, who played like an angel, who had you looking at him like he hung the moon." He shook his head. "I was a nobody scholarship kid, and he was everything I wanted to be, and when he died, part of me thought, at least now I have a chance. At least now I won't always be in his shadow." "Ethan," and then the stage collapsed and my hand was destroyed, and I realized the universe has a sick sense of irony. I'd wished for him to be gone, and I got my wish, but the cost was everything I had. So yeah, I took your father's settlement. I took the money that was supposed to keep me quiet, and I used it to disappear, because living with what I'd thought, what I'd wanted, was worse than any physical pain." Isabel felt tears burning behind her eyes. "You didn't cause the collapse. You didn't kill him." "I know that. Rationally, I know that. But grief isn't rational, and guilt doesn't care about logic." Ethan moved back toward her, stopping when only a few feet separated them. "So why are you really here, Ms. Grant? What do you want from me? Absolution? Permission to feel less guilty about your family's crimes? Because I can't give you that. I can barely give it to myself. I want—" Isabel stopped, trying to find words for something she barely understood. "I want to make it right. I know I can't undo what happened. I know I can't give you back the 16 years you lost, or restore your hand, or bring back the people who died. But I can acknowledge the truth. I can stop pretending the official story was the whole story, and I can try to make sure it never happens again. Noble sentiment. What does that look like in practice? I don't know yet." Isabel's honesty surprised her. I called off my engagement. I'm postponing the merger. I confronted my father about the cover-up. But beyond that, I'm making this up as I go. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, not quite softening, but maybe acknowledging her honesty with his own. Rodriguez told me you asked about me, that you've been looking into things. I needed to understand not just what happened to you, but who you are now, how you survived, how you found your way to Lily. At his daughter's name, Ethan's whole demeanor changed. The armor dropped, replaced by something tender and fierce. Lily's mother was a nurse, Emma. We met at a clinic where I was getting physical therapy for my hand. She was kind and patient, and she never asked questions about my past because she was running from her own. He smiled, sad and genuine. We saved each other for a while, got married at City Hall, had Lily, and for 5 years I got to pretend I was someone new, someone who could build a life instead of haunting one. What happened to her? Cancer, ovarian. By the time they caught it, there was nothing to do but make her comfortable. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. She made me promise I'd take care of Lily, that I'd give her music and joy and all the things Emma and I never had growing up. And I've tried. I've done everything I can, but it's not enough. It's never enough. That's why you're leaving, Isabel said. Milwaukee. Rodriguez told me. Ethan nodded. There's a better job there. Union position, benefits, actual stability, and distance from here. From you and your questions and the past that keeps trying to drag me under. What if I told you there might be another option? What option? Isabel took a breath, committing to words she hadn't fully formed until this moment. Stay. Help me fix this. Not just what happened at Interlaken, but the whole system that allowed it. Help me transform Grant Properties into a company that values people over profit margins. Ethan stared at her like she'd suggested they sprout wings and fly. You're serious? Completely. Ms. Grant, Isabel, you don't understand what you're asking. Your company, your family, the entire structure of how business works in this city. It's built on compromises like the one your father made. You can't fix that from the inside. The system protects itself. Then we burn it down and build something better. With what? Good intentions? His words echoed her father's dismissal, but his tone was different. Not mocking, but genuinely questioning. You'd lose everything. Your position, your wealth, your father's approval. The board would destroy you. Maybe. Isabel met his eyes. But what's the alternative? Keep pretending? Keep being complicit? I've spent 16 years building a career on foundations made of people like you, people my family crushed and paid off and erased. I'm done. I don't care what it costs. You say that now. I mean it. The certainty in her voice surprised them both. I called off my engagement this morning. The man I was supposed to marry has been cooking his company's books for years, using our merger to legitimize fraud. And when I confronted him, you know what he said? That I'm just as corrupt as everyone else, just better at hiding it. And he was right. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. What did you do? I ended it. The engagement, the merger, all of it. And then I started digging into how many other projects might be compromised, how many other corners we've cut, how many other families we've paid to stay quiet. She pulled out her phone, opened the secure folder where she'd stored the photographed documents. I have everything, internal memos, inspection reports, settlement agreements, enough to destroy my father's legacy and probably take down half the board. You'd release that? Publicly? If I have to, if that's what it takes to stop the pattern. But I'm hoping there's another way. A way to force change from inside while protecting the people who depend on the company for their livelihoods. Ethan took the phone, scrolling through the images with an expression that cycled through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been grief. When he handed it back, his hand was shaking. There are 8 settlements in those files, he said. 8 families who signed NDAs just like I did. If you release this, you violate their privacy. You drag them back into trauma they paid to escape. You might destroy your father, but you'll hurt them all over again in the process. Isabel felt the truth of his words like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on justice, on making amends, that she hadn't considered the collateral damage her righteousness might cause. Then what do I do? She asked. How do I make this right without making it worse? I don't know. Ethan handed back her phone. But I do know that revenge disguised as justice still destroys people. And I know that Lily needs stability more than I need vindication. So whatever you decide to do with those files, with your crusade to save your soul, leave us out of it. We're going to Milwaukee. We're starting over, again. And this time, I'm not looking back. He started to walk away, his footsteps sharp against the wet pavement, and Isabel felt something inside her break. Not the clean break of a bone that could heal, but the messy splintering of something that had been cracking for years. Wait, she called. Please, just wait. Ethan stopped but didn't turn around. The song, Isabel said, the one you played on Christmas Eve. You told me you finished it, that you gave it away, but you never told me who you gave it to. Does it matter? Yes, because I need to know if Christopher Hartley's music survived him, if something beautiful came from all that loss. Ethan was quiet for so long Isabel thought he wouldn't answer. Then, still facing away from her, he spoke. I gave it to a girl at that summer camp. She was 17, brilliant, mourning a boy who'd loved her, and I thought, his voice caught. I thought maybe if she had the completed song she could finish grieving, move on, become the person he believed she could be. Isabel's vision blurred. How did you give it to her? I didn't. I was too much of a coward to face her, so I left the sheet music in the camp's music library with a note. He wanted you to hear how it ended. He wanted you to know it was always about hope. I signed it a friend and disappeared before she could find out who I was. The pieces clicked into place, all the mystery and impossibility resolving into simple, devastating truth. I never got that sheet music. I never saw your note. Ethan turned slowly, his face pale. What? The camp closed a month after the accident. Everything was packed up, donated, dispersed. I went back looking for his things, for anything that would help me remember him clearly, but there was nothing, just empty buildings and a for sale sign. So you never knew. Ethan's voice was hollow. You spent 16 years thinking the song was unfinished. Until Christmas Eve, until I heard you play it. Isabel wiped at her eyes, not caring about the mascara tracking down her cheeks. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. You gave me the ending to his story, and you didn't even know it. They stood in the empty pavilion, two people shaped by the same tragedy, finally understanding how their wounds had been speaking to each other across 16 years of silence. I don't know what to do with this, Ethan said finally. With you. With any of it. Neither do I. Isabel's honesty felt like the only solid thing in a world that had become unmoored. But I know I can't let you leave without trying, without at least offering you a choice that isn't between running and drowning. What choice? Come work for me. Not as a janitor, as a consultant. Help me restructure the company from someone who knows what it's like to be on the receiving end of corporate negligence. Help me build something that values human dignity over quarterly profits. And let me help you. She held up a hand before he could protest. I know you don't want charity, so make it a trade. I'll fund whatever surgery or therapy might restore more function to your hand. In exchange, you help me dismantle my father's empire and build something better from the pieces. That's insane. Probably. But what's the alternative? You move to Milwaukee and spend the rest of your life working jobs that break your body while Lily grows up watching you sacrifice everything for her survival? Or I stay here and continue profiting from a system I know is corrupt while pretending I'm different from my father. Isabel stepped closer. We're both trapped, Ethan, but maybe together we can find a way out. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out, frowned at the screen, then answered. Mrs. Santos, is everything? His face went white. I'm on my way. He was already moving, breaking into a run toward the park exit, and Isabel found herself running too, her heels slipping on wet pavement. What happened? She called. Lily, she's sick. High fever, Mrs. Santos can't get it down. I need to... He didn't finish, just ran faster. They reached the street where he'd parked his ancient Honda, and Ethan fumbled with his keys, his scarred hand not cooperating with his panic. Let me drive, Isabel said. My car's faster, and I know which hospitals have the shortest ER wait times. I can't. Ethan. She grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. Let me help, please. Let me do something useful for once in my privileged life. He searched her face for something, trustworthiness maybe, or just desperation that matched his own. Then he nodded, and they were moving again, this time to her Mercedes parked a block away. The drive to Bridgeport took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Ethan called Mrs. Santos twice for updates, his voice tight with controlled panic. Isabel broke every traffic law she knew, praying the Mercedes' discreet wealth would protect them from tickets, grateful when it did. Mrs. Santos met them at the apartment building's entrance. Lily wrapped in a blanket in her arms, the little girl's face flushed with fever, her eyes glassy and unfocused. She was fine an hour ago, Mrs. Santos said, her accent thick with worry. Then she said her throat hurt, and then the fever just spiked. I gave her children's Tylenol, but it's not working. Ethan took his daughter, cradling her against his chest. Hey, baby, Daddy's here. We're going to make you feel better, okay? My throat hurts, Lily whispered, and I'm cold. I know, sweetheart. We're going to the hospital. They were back in the Mercedes within seconds, Ethan in the back seat holding Lily, murmuring reassurances while Isabel drove with the kind of focused intensity she usually reserved for boardroom negotiations. Northwestern Memorial's ER was mercifully quiet for a weeknight. Isabel bypassed the registration desk and went straight to triage, using her family name shamelessly for the first time in her life for something that actually mattered. My friend's daughter needs to be seen immediately. High fever, sore throat, rapid onset. The triage nurse looked skeptical until she saw Lily's flushed face and Ethan's barely controlled terror. Bring her back. What followed was a blur of examination rooms and worried doctors, blood tests and throat swabs, Ethan hovering at Lily's side while she cried about the needle and complained about the lights being too bright. Isabel stood in the corner, useless but unwilling to leave, watching a man made of quiet strength finally crack under the weight of loving someone more than he loved his own survival. Is she going to be okay? He asked the attending physician, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and no-nonsense efficiency. Probably strep throat. We're waiting on the rapid test to confirm. If it is, we'll start her on antibiotics and she should improve within 24 hours. But her fever's high enough that I want to keep her for observation overnight. Make sure she responds to treatment. Overnight, Ethan's face showed every calculation he was making. Missed work, lost wages, the cost of a hospital stay even with his minimal insurance. Can't I just take her home and monitor her? I'd really prefer to keep her here. High fevers in children can progress quickly. Better safe than sorry. Isabel saw Ethan's jaw tighten, saw him weighing his daughter's safety against financial realities that shouldn't exist in one of the richest countries in the world. She stepped forward before he could argue. Keep her overnight, she said. Whatever the cost, I'll cover it. Miss Grant, I can't. You can. Isabel's voice was firm. And you will, because Lily needs to be safe, and you need to stop making impossible choices between her health and your finances. I don't want your charity. It's not charity. She met his eyes. It's the beginning of paying back a debt my family owes you. Consider it a down payment. The doctor looked between them, clearly sensing complicated history, but wise enough not to ask questions. I'll get the admission started. She'll be in a room within the hour. After she left, Ethan sank into the chair beside Lily's gurney, his head in his hands. On the bed, Lily had fallen into a restless sleep, small and vulnerable under the sterile hospital blanket. I can't do this anymore, Ethan said quietly. I can't keep juggling everything and pretending it's enough. She deserves better than this. Better than me. She has you. That's more than better. Isabel pulled up a chair sitting beside him. Ethan, you're an incredible father. Anyone can see that. An incredible father who can barely afford antibiotics, who has to decide between keeping his job and staying at his daughter's hospital bed, who's about to uproot her entire life for the third time because I can't make anything work for more than a few years. His voice cracked. Emma made me promise I'd give her everything, and I'm failing every single day. I'm failing. No. Isabel reached out, then hesitated, unsure if touch would be welcome. You're surviving impossible circumstances. There's a difference. Is there? He looked up, his eyes red. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like surrender. They sat in silence, the hospital's ambient sounds filling the space between them, monitors beeping, distant conversations, the susurrus of healing happening slowly in rooms like this all over the city. Finally, Isabel spoke. I meant what I said earlier, about helping you, about making you an offer that's real and not charity. She paused. But I also know that tonight isn't the time for big decisions. Tonight is for Lily. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to stay here with you both. I'm going to make sure she gets the best possible care, and I'm going to handle whatever needs handling so you can just be her father. No conditions, no strings, just one human helping another. Ethan studied her for a long moment. Why? Because 16 years ago, I lost someone who mattered, and I've spent all that time building walls around the pain instead of doing anything useful with it. But you took the same pain and made Lily. You chose life and love and sacrifice. And maybe if I help you, even a little, it'll mean something. It'll mean the tragedy didn't just end with death and disappearance. That's a lot of weight to put on one sick kid. It's not on her, it's on me. And maybe on you, if you decide my offer is worth considering. But right now, it's just about making sure she's okay. They kept vigil through the night, taking turns dozing in uncomfortable hospital chairs while nurses checked Lily's vitals every few hours. The strep test came back positive around midnight. The antibiotics started working by 3 a.m., her fever finally breaking, her sleep becoming less restless. Isabel called her assistant at dawn with instructions to cancel everything on her calendar for the next 2 days. Then she went to the hospital cafeteria and brought back terrible coffee and surprisingly decent breakfast sandwiches. Ethan took his gratefully, eating like someone who'd forgotten about food until his body reminded him. You didn't have to stay. I wanted to. Why? Because I'm tired of being the person who only shows up when it's convenient. I want to be someone who stays. Lily woke around 8, her fever gone, her eyes clear and focused. She saw Isabel and smiled. The pretty lady came back. I did. Isabel moved closer to the bed. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Better, but my throat still hurts. The medicine will help with that. You'll be back to normal soon. But, Daddy, Lily turned to Ethan, can the pretty lady come have breakfast with us sometime? When I'm not sick? Ethan's expression was complicated, cycling through too many emotions to name. We'll see, baby. That means no, Lily informed Isabel seriously. When grown-ups say, we'll see, it always means no. Isabel laughed despite herself. Not always. Sometimes it means they need to think about it. Are you thinking about it, Daddy? Ethan met Isabel's eyes across his daughter's hospital bed, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the beginning of understanding. The recognition that they were both broken in ways that matched, that maybe their damage could form something like strength if they were brave enough to try. Yeah, he said finally. I'm thinking about it. The doctor discharged Lily that afternoon with instructions for rest and antibiotics and follow-up if the fever returned. Isabel drove them home, helped carry Lily upstairs while Ethan fumbled with his keys and stood awkwardly in the doorway of their small apartment. Thank you, Ethan said, for last night, for all of it. You're welcome. Isabel pulled out her phone. I'm going to give you my personal number, not my work line, my actual cell. If you need anything, or if Lily gets worse, or if you just want to talk about the offer I made, call me. Anytime. He took the number, saved it, but didn't promise to use it. Isabel left before the silence could become awkward, her heels clicking down the stairs, her mind already racing through everything that needed to happen next. But when she reached her car and looked back up at the third-floor window, she saw Ethan standing there with Lily in his arms, both of them watching her. And for the first time in 16 years, Isabel felt like she might be moving towards something instead of running away. The next morning, she walked into the Grant Properties board meeting with a manila folder that contained copies of everything she'd found in the archives. Her father saw it and went pale. The board members sensed blood in the water, but didn't yet know whose. Before we begin, Isabel said, her voice steady, I need to make an announcement. I'm formally requesting an independent audit of all Grant Properties projects from the past 20 years, with special attention to safety protocols and settlement agreements. I'm also proposing a restructuring of our oversight procedures to ensure that budget concerns never override safety requirements. The room erupted. Board members talking over each other, demanding explanations, threatening votes of no confidence. Her father sat silent, his face carved from stone, his eyes promising consequences Isabel couldn't yet imagine. But she stood at the head of the table, her armor finally stripped away, her privilege weaponized for something that might actually matter, and refused to back down. Because somewhere in Bridgeport, a little girl was recovering from strep throat in an apartment that was too small but filled with love. And her father was probably wrestling with an impossible decision, whether to trust the woman whose family destroyed his life or to keep running towards safety that might never exist. Isabel couldn't control what Ethan chose, but she could control what she chose. And she was choosing truth, even if it cost her everything. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than anyone expected. 7 members voted to remove her as CEO. 6 voted to keep her. Her father abstained, which was somehow more damaging than opposition. She kept her position by a margin so thin it might as well have been a warning. But she kept it, and that meant the work could begin. That night her phone rang, an unknown number. "Ms. Grant? It's Ethan." A pause. "I've been thinking about your offer, and I have conditions. A lot of them." Isabel felt something in her chest unfurl, fragile as hope. "I'm listening." "First, this isn't about revenge or justice or making the past right. It's about building something different, something that means Lily grows up in a world that's marginally less terrible than the one we got." "Agreed." "Second, I need autonomy. I won't be your pet project or your redemption arc. If I'm doing this, I'm doing it because I believe in it, not because you need to feel less guilty." "Fair." "Third, whatever medical treatment you're offering for my hand, I need a second opinion, and a third, and I need to know exactly what the chances are because I can't build my hopes on miracles that don't exist." "Of course." There was a long pause. Isabel could hear Lily singing in the background, some made-up song about butterflies and ice cream. "Okay," Ethan said finally. "Let's try this." "But Isabel, if you're not serious, if this is just some impulse that you'll abandon when it gets hard, tell me now. Because I can't afford to believe in things that aren't real. Not anymore." "I'm serious," Isabel said. "I'm terrified and probably in over my head, but I'm serious. We'll figure it out together. Or we'll fail spectacularly trying." "Those are not comforting odds." "No," she agreed, "but they're honest ones." After they hung up, Isabel stood in her penthouse and looked out at the city that had shaped her, that she was trying to reshape, that would probably resist every attempt at change with the full weight of entrenched power and comfortable corruption. But somewhere in that city, a man who'd lost everything was choosing to believe in possibility again. And a little girl was falling asleep safe and healthy, dreaming dreams her father was determined to protect. It wasn't justice. It wasn't enough. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, Isabel was learning, beginnings were all you could ask for. The surgery was scheduled for a Thursday in March, 6 weeks after Ethan had agreed to Isabel's offer, and 4 consultations with specialists who all said variations of the same thing. Experimental, risky, no guarantees. The scar tissue in his hand had calcified over 16 years. Nerve pathways had rerouted themselves around damage, and even the most optimistic surgeon gave him only a 40% chance of significant improvement. Ethan took those odds and signed the consent forms anyway. Isabel sat in the surgical waiting room with Lily, who was working through a coloring book with fierce concentration, her tongue poking out slightly as she tried to keep the crayon inside the lines. Mrs. Santos had offered to take her, but Lily had insisted she wanted to be there when her daddy woke up, and Ethan hadn't had the heart to say no. "Is Daddy going to be able to play better?" Lily asked without looking up from her coloring. "Like really better? Not just pretend better." Isabel had learned over the past 6 weeks that Lily saw through adult evasions with unsettling clarity. "We hope so. But even if the surgery doesn't work exactly how we want, your daddy will still be the same person. Still love you just as much." "I know that." Lily finally looked up, her expression serious. "But he gets sad sometimes. when he thinks I'm not looking, and I think he'd be less sad if his hand didn't hurt all the time." The observation landed in Isabel's chest with unexpected weight. She'd been so focused on the practical elements, finding the right surgeon, arranging the financing, setting up Ethan's new position at Grant Properties, that she'd almost forgotten this was about more than just function. It was about a man reclaiming parts of himself he'd been forced to bury. "You're very wise for 7 years old," Isabel said. "I'm almost 8. Lily returned to her coloring. "And Daddy says I'm an old soul. I don't know what that means, but I think it's good." The surgery took 6 hours. Isabel bought Lily 3 hot chocolates from the cafeteria, let her watch cartoons on her phone, and tried not to watch the clock too obsessively. Around hour 4, her own phone buzzed with messages from the office, crises that 2 months ago would have sent her into strategic overdrive, but now felt distant and manageable. Sarah's text was typical. "Board meeting moved to Monday. Your father wants to discuss the Riverside project delays. Also, Nathan's lawyers are still threatening litigation over the broken engagement. Want me to handle it?" Isabel typed back, "Handle the lawyers. Tell father I'll address Riverside when I address it." And Sarah, "Thank you for covering for me today. That's what you pay me for. How's the surgery going?" "Still waiting. Lily's being brave. Tell her she's not the only one." Isabel stared at that message for a long time, understanding that Sarah was talking about more than just Lily. The past 6 weeks had been brutal. The board constantly questioning her decisions, her father refusing to speak to her outside of mandatory business discussions, colleagues whispering about her breakdown or her crisis of conscience or whatever narrative made her transformation digestible. But she'd also discovered allies in unexpected places. Rodriguez from maintenance had connected her with 3 other employees who had safety concerns they'd been afraid to voice. A junior accountant had quietly provided documentation of other questionable projects. And Ethan had proven to be exactly what she'd hoped, unflinchingly honest about the company's failures while somehow still believing it could be reformed. Their working relationship had been strange and careful, both of them navigating around the weight of everything unsaid. He'd moved into a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, close enough to Lily's school that she could walk. He'd started therapy again, working through trauma he'd been suppressing for 16 years. And he'd begun teaching Isabel what it meant to build a company that saw workers as humans instead of resources. It was slow, frustrating work, but it was also the first thing Isabel had done in years that felt genuinely important. The surgeon finally emerged at 6:15, still in her scrubs, her expression carefully neutral in that way medical professionals had perfected. "The surgery went well," Dr. Chen said. "We were able to remove more scar tissue than expected and repair some of the nerve damage. But I want to be clear, this is just the first step. He'll need months of physical therapy, and we won't know the extent of improvement for at least 6 months." "But there's a chance," Isabel heard the desperation in her own voice. "A real chance he could play again? There's a chance he could regain enough function for daily activities with minimal pain, and anything beyond that is speculation." Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly. "But I will say this, his determination is remarkable. He pushed through the pre-op preparation with a focus I rarely see. Whatever's motivating him, it's powerful." After the surgeon left, Lily looked up at Isabel with those 2 wise eyes. "She didn't really answer your question." "No," Isabel admitted. "She didn't. Doctors have to be careful about making promises." "But you think Daddy will play again. I can tell." "I hope he will." "Hope and certainty are different things." "That's what Daddy always says." Lily went back to her coloring, adding purple to what was supposed to be a yellow sun. "I think hope is better anyway. Certainty is boring." They let them see Ethan 30 minutes later. He was groggy from anesthesia, his right hand wrapped in bandages that made it look twice its normal size. But he managed a weak smile when Lily climbed carefully onto the bed beside him. "Hey, baby girl. Did you behave for Ms. Grant?" "I was perfect." Lily snuggled against his left side, avoiding the IV lines. "And I only cried a little bit when they wouldn't let me see you." "You're the bravest person I know." Ethan kissed the top of her head, then his eyes found Isabel standing awkwardly by the door. "You stayed." "Of course I stayed." Isabel moved closer. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone took my hand apart and put it back together, which I guess is exactly what happened." He tried to flex his fingers and winced. Dr. Chen says it'll be a while before we know if it worked. She also said you were remarkably determined. I have good motivation. His eyes moved to Lily, who had already fallen asleep against his chest, exhausted from hours of worry. I want to play at her school recital next year. She's learning violin. Did I tell you that? You didn't. Isabel felt something warm unfold in her chest. That's wonderful. Rodriguez's wife teaches music lessons. She's giving Lily a scholarship rate because apparently I've become a charity case. The words had no heat behind them, just tired acceptance. But I figure if I can get my hand working again, maybe I can accompany her. Give her that memory of her dad being part of her music, not just someone who used to play. You'll get there. Isabel surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. However long it takes, whatever therapy is needed, we'll make sure you get there. Why? Ethan asked quietly. Why does this matter so much to you? It was the question he'd been asking in different ways for 6 weeks, and Isabel had given him different answers each time, about justice, about making amends, about transforming the company. All of them true, none of them complete. Because 16 years ago, I lost someone who made me believe the world could be beautiful, she said finally, and I spent all that time thinking beauty died with him, that the song was finished, that all I could do was survive. But then I heard you play on Christmas Eve, and I realized I'd been wrong. The song wasn't finished, I just couldn't hear how it continued. And maybe if I help you reclaim your music, it means beauty doesn't have to die with tragedy. It means we can make something worthwhile from the wreckage. Ethan studied her face for a long moment. That's a lot of pressure to put on a broken hand and an old grudge. It's not a grudge, it's a choice. And you're already making it every day when you choose Lily over bitterness, when you choose to believe things can be better even when all the evidence says they can't. Is that what you think I'm doing? Choosing optimism? I think you're choosing love, which is braver than optimism. The hospital room fell quiet except for the machines monitoring Ethan's vitals and Lily's soft breathing. Finally, Ethan spoke. The company restructuring you proposed, the one where we reallocate 20% of executive bonuses to safety improvements and employee assistance programs. Your father is going to fight it with everything he has. I know. And the board investigation into past projects. That's going to uncover things that make Interlochen look minor by comparison. I know that too. So you're aware that you're committing professional suicide, that even if you survive the board votes, your reputation in this industry will be destroyed. No one trusts a CEO who turns on her own company. I'm not turning on it, I'm trying to save it. That's not how people will see it. Ethan shifted slightly, careful not to wake Lily. I'm saying this because I need you to understand what you're giving up, in case you change your mind while there's still time to walk it back. I'm not walking anything back. Isabel pulled up a chair and sat down, settling in for the long night ahead. I made my choice. I'm seeing it through. Even if it costs you everything? Especially then. Because what's the alternative? Keep building wealth on other people's suffering? Keep pretending the system works when it only works for people like me? She shook her head. I can't do that anymore. I physically can't walk into that building every day and pretend I don't know what it's built on. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, you're going to need allies. Real ones, not board members trying to protect their positions. People who understand what you're trying to do and why it matters. Do you have someone in mind? Maybe. I've been talking to some of the other settlement families. Carefully, without violating the NDAs, just checking in, seeing how they're doing. And a few of them, when I mentioned that things might be changing at Grant Properties, that maybe there was a chance for real accountability. They were interested. Isabel felt her pulse quicken. Interested how? Interested in telling their stories if the legal protections were removed. Interested in being part of something that might prevent other families from going through what we went through. He paused. But Isabel, if we go down that road, there's no coming back. Those NDAs are the only thing keeping your company from massive liability. You break them, you're opening yourself up to lawsuits that could destroy everything. Then we'll be destroyed building something honest instead of thriving on lies. You say that now, Dad? I mean it. Isabel leaned forward. Ethan, I spent my whole life being my father's daughter. Being the perfect CEO, making the strategic decisions, protecting the bottom line. And I was miserable. I had everything except a reason to wake up in the morning. But these past 6 weeks, working with you, trying to fix what's broken, I finally feel like I'm doing something that matters. So yes, I'm prepared to lose everything, because at least I'll lose it on my own terms." The conviction in her voice seemed to surprise them both. Ethan looked at her like he was seeing her clearly for the first time, not as Robert Grant's daughter or the CEO who'd disrupted his carefully maintained anonymity, but as someone equally lost and equally determined to find their way. "All right," he said finally, "then we're doing this. No half measures, no walking it back when it gets hard. We're tearing down the whole rotten structure and building something better." "We're doing this," Isabel agreed. They shook on it awkwardly, Ethan's left hand in her right, Lily sleeping peacefully between them, and Isabel felt like they were making a promise that would reshape both their lives in ways neither could fully anticipate. The next 6 months proved her right. The board investigation uncovered 12 other projects where safety protocols had been compromised for budget reasons. 3 class action lawsuits were filed. Isabel's father resigned in disgrace, though he managed to negotiate a golden parachute that protected his personal wealth. The company's stock price dropped 30%, and shareholders demanded Isabel's removal with increasing violence. But something unexpected happened. The story of the CEO who'd turned on her own company to protect workers became national news. Reporters called her naive, brave, calculating, stupid, but they couldn't stop talking about her. Labor unions endorsed her. Workers' rights groups held her up as an example of ethical leadership. And slowly, painfully, Grant Properties began to change. Not all of it was good change. They lost clients who didn't want to work with a company that prioritized safety over speed. They hemorrhaged money on retrofitting old projects and implementing new protocols. Isabel had to fire executives who refused to adapt and promote people who'd never expected to have real power. But Rodriguez became head of safety operations. Sarah was promoted to COO. And Ethan, once his hand had healed enough, became the director of worker advocacy, a position that didn't exist until Isabel created it specifically for him. His recovery was slower than anyone hoped, but faster than the doctors expected. By summer, he could hold a coffee cup without pain. By fall, he could type on a keyboard for hours without cramping. And by winter, when Lily's school announced their holiday recital, he could play piano again, not with the virtuosity of his youth, but with enough skill to accompany a 7-year-old's enthusiastic violin. Isabel sat in the audience that December evening, surrounded by parents with cameras and grandparents with tissues, watching Ethan and Lily perform a duet they'd practiced every evening for 3 months. Lily's playing was enthusiastic but imprecise, her bow sometimes squeaking across the strings, her timing occasionally off. But Ethan followed her perfectly, his right hand doing what it could while his left carried the melody, his whole body bent toward his daughter with such obvious love that half the audience was crying before they finished. When they were done, Lily took a bow that was more of a collapse, grinning so wide her face seemed to split in half. And Ethan stood behind her, his scarred hand resting on her shoulder, and looked out into the audience until his eyes found Isabel. The gratitude in his expression was so raw it almost hurt to witness. After the recital, they went out for ice cream, Isabel, Ethan, and Lily, an unlikely trio that had become something like family. Lily chattered about every note she'd played, certain she'd been perfect, and neither adult had the heart to correct her. "You two were incredible," Isabel said, and meant it. "We were okay." Ethan's humility couldn't quite hide his pride. "But it's a start. Dr. Chen thinks with more therapy, I might regain another 10% of function. And if you don't, then I have what I have, which is enough." He looked at Lily, who was now wearing more chocolate ice cream than she'd eaten. More than enough. They walked through Lincoln Park afterward, Lily running ahead to look at Christmas lights while the adults followed at a slower pace. The city sparkled around them, cold and beautiful, and Isabel felt something she hadn't felt in 16 years, contentment. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, his hands shoved in his pockets, his breath forming clouds in the winter air, "about Christopher Hartley, about the boy he was, and the man he might have become." "What about him?" "I spent so long being jealous of him, then guilty about him, then trying to forget him, but recently I've started thinking that maybe he'd be okay with how things turned out, that maybe he'd be glad his song found its way to you, even if it took 16 years and a circuitous route through my broken life." I think he'd be proud of you, Isabel said quietly. Of how you survived. Of Lily. Of everything you've built from the rubble. Maybe. Ethan's smile was sad and genuine. Or maybe he'd wonder why I wasted so much time being angry when I could have been making music. That was always his way. Forward, not back. Hope, not regret. They caught up to Lily, who'd found a street musician playing violin under a street lamp, her case open for donations. The melody was familiar, something classical that Isabel couldn't quite place, but it filled the cold air with warmth. Without discussing it, they all stopped to listen. And when the musician finished, Ethan dropped a 20 in her case and said, "That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing it with the city." The woman smiled, surprised by his genuine appreciation. That's what music is for, sharing the beautiful things so we remember they exist. As they walked away, Lily tugging at both their hands, Isabel realized that's exactly what they'd been doing all along, taking something broken and painful and finding the beauty that remained, refusing to let tragedy have the final word. The lawsuits took another year to settle. Grant Properties paid out restitution to the families affected by past negligence, not because the statute of limitations didn't protect them, it did, but because Isabel made them do it anyway. The company almost went bankrupt in the process. Several board members quit in protest. Isabel's professional reputation became so controversial that business schools couldn't decide whether to hold her up as a hero or a cautionary tale. But the company survived. Smaller, humbler, but genuinely committed to the reforms Isabel and Ethan had fought for. And slowly, workers began to trust it again. Projects came in on time without cutting corners. Safety incidents dropped to nearly zero. The stock price stabilized, then gradually climbed as investors realized that ethical companies could still be profitable, just not obscenely so. Isabel's father never spoke to her again. He released a statement calling her naive and claiming she'd destroyed his legacy. The family fortune, built over 3 generations, was significantly diminished by the settlements and reforms. But Isabel slept better at night. By the time spring arrived, 2 years after that Christmas Eve encounter, Isabel had become someone her 17-year-old self might have recognized. Not the grief-stricken girl or the ruthless CEO, but something in between, scarred by experience but not hardened by it, powerful but not at others' expense. She was having coffee with Ethan in his office, the corner position he'd initially refused, thinking it was too grand for someone like him, but had finally accepted when Isabel pointed out that visibility was part of the job. When he said, "I've been working on something, a piece of music, and I'd like your opinion." "You know I'm not qualified to judge. It's not about judgment. It's about—" He paused, searching for words. Closure. Or maybe the opposite of closure. Opening something that's been sealed too long. He led her to the conference room they'd converted into a small practice space, complete with an upright piano that was older than both of them but maintained with obvious care. Sitting at the bench, Ethan flexed his right hand, a habit he'd developed, testing his capabilities before attempting anything complex, and began to play. The melody started familiar. The song from Christmas Eve, Christopher Hartley's unfinished piece, now completed. But instead of ending where it had before, the music continued. It evolved into something new, something that acknowledged the original beauty but wasn't trapped by it. The bass notes became a foundation rather than an anchor. The treble melody soared higher than before, finding harmonies that suggested joy earned through suffering rather than given freely. It was Isabel realized the story of everything that had happened between them, the tragedy and the survival, the anger and the forgiveness, the old dreams dying so new ones could grow. When Ethan finished, his hands resting on the keys, he looked up at her. "I'm calling it second movement, not because it's the second part of his song, but because it's about second chances, second lives, the movement that comes after you think the story is over." Isabel found she couldn't speak past the emotion lodging in her throat. "I'm going to perform it," Ethan continued, "at the Pritzker Pavilion. The city's hosting a benefit concert for the families affected by workplace negligence, and they asked if I'd play. I thought this would be appropriate." "It's perfect," Isabel managed finally. "It's absolutely perfect." The concert was scheduled for a Saturday in June when the weather cooperated and the city felt alive with possibility. The pavilion was packed, not just with the usual classical music crowd, but with workers from Grant Properties, families from the settlements, reporters curious about the CEO who'd become a crusader, and regular people who'd heard about the janitor who'd become a symbol of resilience. Isabel sat in the audience with Lily, who'd grown another 2 inches and lost a front tooth and was already planning her future career as a professional violinist. Mrs. Santos was there, and Rodriguez and his family, and Sarah with a date she'd been seeing for 6 months and was trying to keep secret from office gossip. When Ethan walked onto the stage, the applause was immediate and warm. He wore a simple suit, nothing expensive, and carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd finally made peace with his own story. At the piano, he adjusted the bench, flexed his right hand, and began to play. The familiar melody rose into the evening air, and Isabel felt herself transported back to that Christmas Eve when everything had changed. But this time, when the song reached the point where Christopher Hartley's version had ended, Ethan didn't stop. He continued into new territory, his scarred hand doing what it could, while his left hand carried melodies that spoke of pain transmuted into purpose, loss transformed into love. The music built towards something that felt both inevitable and surprising, a crescendo that acknowledged suffering without being defined by it, that honored the past without being trapped there. It was hope that had earned the right to exist, joy that understood what darkness felt like, and chose light anyway. As the final notes faded into the summer evening, the silence that followed was profound. Then someone in the audience started clapping, and within seconds, everyone was standing, applause washing over the stage in waves that felt like absolution. Ethan stood and bowed, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found Isabel and Lily. And the smile on his face was pure and uncomplicated, free of the shadows that had haunted him for 16 years. After the concert, they gathered in the green space behind the pavilion, all of them, the unlikely family they'd assembled from broken pieces. Lily was demonstrating her latest violin technique to anyone who'd watch. Rodriguez was arguing good-naturedly with Sarah about building codes. Mrs. Santos was feeding everyone empanadas she'd made that morning because, in her words, celebrations require proper food, not this fancy cheese nonsense. And Ethan and Isabel stood slightly apart from the group, watching the people they'd somehow brought together. "You did it," Isabel said quietly. "You reclaimed your music." "We did it," Ethan corrected. "You gave me back the possibility of becoming someone other than what the tragedy made me. That's not a small thing. You gave me a reason to try being better. That's not small either." They stood in comfortable silence, the evening wrapping around them like a promise, until Lily ran over demanding they come see her cartwheel, and the moment dissolved into laughter and motion and the complicated joy of lives being actively lived rather than passively endured. Later, as the sun set and the city lights began their evening performance, Isabel found herself thinking about that 17-year-old girl on a dock at summer camp, listening to a boy play a song he'd written just for her. She'd thought that was the peak of her life, that moment of perfect young love before the world revealed its capacity for cruelty. But she'd been wrong. That wasn't the peak. It was just the beginning, the first movement in a composition that had taken 16 years to complete. And while the middle movements had been discord and pain, the final movement was something she never could have imagined back then. Not perfect happiness, but earned contentment. Not romance, but something deeper, connection forged in shared purpose and mutual respect. 3 months later, Grant Properties announced a new initiative, the Christopher Hartley Memorial Fund, dedicated to supporting young musicians from low-income backgrounds. The fund would provide instruments, lessons, and scholarships, ensuring that talent was never wasted due to circumstance. Ethan designed the program. Isabel funded it. And Lily, who just turned 8, was the first recipient, not because she needed it, but because her father wanted her to understand that sometimes the best way to honor loss was to prevent others from experiencing it. The world didn't transform overnight. Grant Properties remained controversial, fighting constant battles with shareholders who wanted faster profits and competitors who mocked their unsustainable ethics. Isabel was passed over for industry awards she would have won easily in her previous life. Ethan dealt with chronic pain that would never fully disappear, but they'd built something real from the wreckage. A company that saw workers as people, not resources. A fund that gave opportunities to kids who reminded them of who they'd been. A friendship that had survived everything circumstance had thrown at it and emerged stronger. And on evenings when work felt overwhelming or the pain flared too intensely or the weight of memory threatened to crush them, they'd meet at Millennium Park. Not to relive the past, but to remind themselves what they'd chosen to build from it. Sometimes Ethan brought his keyboard and played while Lily practiced violin and tourists gathered to listen. Dropping donations into a case Ethan always redirected to street musicians who needed it more. Sometimes Isabel brought her laptop and worked on reforms, while Ethan reviewed resumes for the scholarship fund, both of them doing the unglamorous work that actual change required. And sometimes they just sat and talked about music and memory, about Lily's growing conviction that she'd be a world-famous performer, about the company's latest crisis, about whether redemption was something you earned or something you simply chose every day until it became real. One evening in their third spring together, as Lily chased fireflies and the city hummed with life around them, Ethan said, "I've been thinking about Christopher Hartley again, about what he'd think of all this. And I think he'd be happy. Not about dying, obviously, or about the collapse, but about the fact that his music didn't die with him, that it survived and evolved and became something that helped people." Ethan smiled, watching Lily's joy. "I think he'd say that's exactly what art is supposed to do, outlive its creator and keep giving meaning." "That's a generous interpretation," Isabel said. "Maybe, but I'm done with ungenerous ones. I spent too many years being bitter about what I lost. Time to focus on what I found." He gestured at the scene around them. Lily's laughter, the city's lights, the future spreading out before them uncertain, but no longer terrifying. And Isabel understood that this was the true ending to the song Christopher Hartley had started all those years ago. Not in his death, not in the tragedy, but in two people choosing to build something beautiful from the ruins. In a little girl learning violin without knowing she was part of a larger composition. In a company slowly transforming itself one ethical decision at a time. The song had never been about perfection or happy endings. It had always been about what you chose to do when the world revealed itself as broken and unjust. Whether you let that knowledge destroy you or whether you used it as foundation to build something better. They'd chosen to build, and the music played on. Years later, when Lily performed at Carnegie Hall, a 17-year-old virtuoso who played with technical precision and emotional depth beyond her years, both Ethan and Isabel sat in the audience and cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming recognition of a promise fulfilled, a story completed, a second movement that had become more beautiful than anyone could have anticipated. The piece Lily performed was her own composition, a violin concerto she'd written entitled simply Hope. And if you listened carefully, beneath the soaring violin melodies, you could hear echoes of a piano song written decades earlier by a boy who'd believed in beauty enough to try capturing it. The song had survived, had evolved, had become something greater than its individual parts. And in the end, that was what mattered. Not the tragedy that had tried to silence them, but the music they'd made anyway. Not the systems that had crushed them, but the new structures they'd built from the pieces. Not the past they couldn't change, but the future they'd refused to surrender. The applause that night seemed to last forever, washing over the stage where a young woman stood with her violin, accepting recognition she'd earned through talent and determination and the love of a father who'd never let her believe her dreams were too expensive to pursue. And somewhere in the front row, a man with scarred hands and a woman who'd sacrificed everything for integrity held each other's hands and understood that they'd done it. They'd turned tragedy into triumph, loss into legacy, pain into purpose. The song Christopher Hartley started that summer had finally found its proper ending, and it was more beautiful than anyone had dared to imagine.